No one has ever explained the Yellowstone Park mystery. I think I know what it is, but who knows for sure? It all started back in 2001 when we were hiking up Specimen Ridge, which is located on the northeast side of the park near Soda Butte. We had decided to go off trail and follow a stream up through a canyon because there was no other way around this cliff face without backtracking several miles. I have been an avid hiker and backpacker since high school. I've always enjoyed going off trail and seeing things that few people ever get to see, especially in national parks. Anyway, as we followed the stream up through this beautiful, narrow canyon with steep cliffs on either side, my girlfriend suddenly froze and grabbed me by the arm. My eyes went straight to where she was pointing above us. Perched on top of a dead tree stump, jutting out from the sheer rock wall was this gigantic bat-looking thing. It must have had a wingspan of about 8 feet or more. It could have easily picked one of us up if it wanted to, though whether or not its claws could grip onto anything smooth enough for takeoff seemed doubtful. At first glance, we both thought it was some kind of large bird because its body did resemble that somewhat. Although instead of feathers covering its skin like birds usually do, this creature's skin appeared scaly, almost leathery looking instead. But then came another shock. When we saw its head better, neither one could believe what our eyes were telling us. Its face looked very similar to that of Satan. Seriously, this beast actually looked demonic. The forehead bulged slightly outward, with 2 small horns protruding upwards and backwards. The eyes were huge, with a menacing, evil look to them, and the nose had sort of a snout-like appearance, except this snout also seemed pointed at the end, sort of like a vampire bat's muzzle looks in cartoons or movies. However, it was very real. And what really gave us chills down our spines was when we saw its mouth open for just an instant, revealing rows upon rows of sharp teeth inside those blood-red lips. At first, we thought maybe it was an endangered species because nobody ever mentioned seeing anything like this before while hiking in Yellowstone. But then, after talking about it later on with some friends who worked there, one guy told me that he knew exactly what I had seen, but that no official explanation would be given by the park's service because they didn't want to create any kind of panic among tourists. I won't say how he knew what these creatures were, only that he confirmed their existence years ago during some research projects being conducted deep within Yellowstone. It seems several sightings occurred over time throughout different areas within the park too, which meant there must have been quite a few individuals living here, although where they stayed hidden most of the time remained unknown as well. Now keep in mind that these demonic-looking bats could easily pass themselves off as large birds if seen from far enough away, especially if all you're seeing is their wingspan against the bright blue sky overhead rather than their bodies up close. We wondered if others might have dismissed them simply as huge birds, since we never heard any stories about encounters involving similar winged beasts coming out of Yellowstone prior to our own experience. Fast forward 4 years, my new girlfriend and I decided to hike through another part of Specimen Ridge, this time heading northeast towards Lamar Valley. Everything went smoothly until near sunset, when something flew over us, making loud flapping noises with its wings. At first, I thought it might be an eagle, but then I remembered what my old girlfriend and I had seen before, so we quickly got our binoculars out for a closer look. To our surprise, they reappeared, this time positioned atop towering lodgepole pines, gazing down upon the valley below. Once more, their enormous wingspans stood out clearly against the twilight sky. However, this time they didn't appear as demonic-looking to us because of the dim lighting conditions and greater distance between us. Nevertheless, it was obvious these creatures were definitely not birds either. We decided to leave right away, rather than wait around till morning, since we couldn't see any logical reason why huge bats would be flying over Yellowstone National Park during daylight hours, unless maybe something happened to disturb them. Anyway, that's my story. Take it or leave it. Though personally, I think you'll find others who've witnessed similar things too if you ask around long enough. My husband works at a local restaurant in Charlottesville, Virginia. He has been working the night shift for about 2 years now, and we have heard of the dogmen before, but didn't really believe it until he had his encounter. His coworker went outside to smoke around 9:30 p.m. on May 20th, when she saw something standing by a nearby tree next to their work area. She said that it looked like a very tall, wolf-like creature with glowing amber eyes. It was also hunched over, so its hands were touching the ground. She then called my husband outside, and they both saw it. The beast walked off into the woods towards an old graveyard where there are reports of strange happenings. My husband tried to get video evidence but could not because he did not want to leave his coworker alone inside. He described this thing as being very muscular with gray fur all over its body. My husband's boss thinks he is making things up just for attention or something. I told him that I would write to you guys, so here I am. We live in Scottsville, Virginia, which is near Charlottesville. This sighting took place around midnight. There have been many other strange occurrences in our town, such as people hearing what sounds like demonic chanting coming from some of the more secluded areas surrounding Scottsville. Some even claim to see what appears to be black hooded figures lurking behind trees late at night. We don't know if these incidents are related or not, but regardless, this experience has made us much more cautious while going out after dark. My husband was never convinced that the thing he saw was a dogman. He thinks it may have been some sort of demon, which I don't really believe in. I did find out some interesting information, though, regarding the strange occurrences surrounding our town. The old graveyard near my husband's work is called the Huntington Graveyard, and has many very old graves dating back to the 1800s. Many people claim to see what they describe as shadow figures lurking behind trees there late at night. A lot of locals also hear strange sounds coming from that area, such as faint whispering and chanting. Some even say they can hear an unknown language being spoken. Others who live close by report hearing loud growls or roars during the early morning hours. Some people, like our neighbors, have even talked about hearing these horrendous screaming late at night. The only problem is the screaming doesn't sound human. Someone even claims to see what looked like a man with deer antlers standing by one of the gravestones. This all sounds too crazy for me to take seriously, but you never know. What we do know is that whatever my husband saw outside his work had a chilling effect on him. He doesn't want to go outside after dark anymore. It scared him enough to buy himself pepper spray for protection, just in case. My husband told me more about his encounter last night when he got home from work. I will tell you exactly what he said, word for word. I went outside because his coworker came inside, saying she saw something creepy by one of those trees across from us. So I grabbed my phone, thinking maybe I could get video evidence or something. We both went out there together. And yeah, it was still standing next to that tree. Then it started walking towards us, but not straight at us. It kind of moved diagonally while looking right at me with these big, glowing amber eyes. When it stepped into view under this light nearby, its fur looked gray and black. At first glance, I thought it might be a bear, but then its shape became clear and it made me realize, oh my gosh, this is not a bear at all. This is a flipping werewolf. Its body was huge, way bigger than any bear I've ever seen. Its legs were very muscular, and its hands looked like paws, but with fingers that touched the ground. Then it disappeared into the woods behind our work building. His coworker was freaking out, and so was I. I didn't want to leave her alone inside, so I couldn't get video of it. I have a few things I'd like to tell you about. The first one dates back to when I was 14, in late summer of '72. We lived in Northern Virginia at the time, and my family took a vacation to Shenandoah National Park for about a week. On our last stay, we stayed at the Skyland Lodge, located near Big Meadows. Several lodges are scattered all throughout the park, but this one sits atop a mountain ridge, offering an amazing view of the valley below. Throughout our stay, I just got this uneasy feeling, but I can never explain why. Something just didn't feel right. The day before, while hiking through these dense woods, I sensed that someone or something was watching me from behind the nearby trees. As it grew dark that evening, we all gathered around a fire pit, enjoying s'mores and conversation. Other families were doing the same further down towards another section, their voices in the air. Suddenly, everyone fell quiet as these large orange glowing balls appeared over the mountainside. They moved erratically across the sky, stopping abruptly, then floating downwards toward the tree line before quickly ascending again. They hovered for a while before vanishing. It was hard to determine the total number of lights due to the darkness and obstructing trees. Everyone was astonished by this strange phenomenon. Some speculated they might be Chinese lanterns or military flares, but most agreed there was no known explanation. That same night, as the kids slept, our parents heard odd noises from the forest. My dad decided to investigate with a flashlight. He returned looking frightened, saying he saw a large creature that jumped up and ran off into the woods. He wasn't sure if it was a bear or something else. This scared all of us. I'd been having nightmares, so I slept in the same bed as my older sister. As we lay there, we heard loud footsteps outside our cabin, followed by scratching on the door. We screamed out of fear, but no one came to help. Strange sounds continued throughout the night. The next morning, we found a dead animal beside a trail near the lodge. It looked like a deer, but we couldn't be certain. At the end of our week-long vacation, someone asked how much fun I had. The truth is, I didn't have any fun due to the weird experiences we encountered. This happened 43 years ago, and I still remember everything clearly. A few years later, my parents took us back to Shenandoah National Park, but we stayed in a different location. The second incident occurred in the late summer of 2012 while driving through George Washington National Forest in the Appalachian Mountains of West Central Virginia, not far south of Winchester. My wife and I were returning home from visiting relatives in West Virginia along US Route 50 eastbound. After crossing into Virginia, we decided to take a scenic route instead of continuing on the interstate. Our trip was uneventful until dusk. First, I noticed a lack of wildlife, such as deer, turkeys, squirrels, and even birds. As we drove deeper into the forest, we saw no other vehicles. Feeling strange, we later stopped at a rest area. I noticed a couple parked nearby in their vehicle, doing who knows what. The building was empty when I went inside. My wife thought she heard voices from the nearby woods, which unnerved me even more. As darkness settled in, we began to notice strange lights appearing through the trees alongside the road. Sometimes these lights followed us for a short distance before disappearing. This continued on and off throughout the night. Finally, around 2 a.m., we arrived home, relieved to be done with the trip. The next day, we noticed several small scratches and larger gouges on the passenger door of our car. We have no idea how they got there and still can't explain them to this day. We've traveled the same route many times since then without any unusual occurrences. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this. My experience took place in Virginia, in a small town called Leesburg. I was living with my boyfriend and his parents at the time. They lived out on an old farm that used to be a Civil War battleground, complete with trenches dug by soldiers during the war. I have always been sensitive to spirits, but I have never had anything quite like this happen before. One night, while we were all sitting around watching television in the living room, I looked over towards the kitchen and saw something standing there. It appeared to be about 6 feet tall and was extremely thin. Its skin appeared to be a grayish white or possibly a pale yellow. The thing that stood out most of all, however, was its eyes. They glowed red like fire embers burning through smoke. After seeing it for only a few seconds, it vanished into thin air right before my eyes. My first thought after it disappeared from view was, did anyone else see that? My subsequent thought, however, transpired as I discerned one of our cats gazing attentively at the spot where it had just been standing and then proceeding to bolt, frightened and rigid. I asked everyone if they had seen what I just did, but apparently no one else had witnessed what happened. As soon as possible afterwards, I moved upstairs and told them how scared I felt having seen whatever that thing might have been. Their response was nothing more than dismissive comments such as, "It is probably just your imagination," or "You must be tired." That is, until about 2 weeks later when my boyfriend's father saw something similar outside, walking near their pond early one morning. One day, not long after this incident occurred, he showed me an article from some newspaper dating back to the 1800s, talking about strange sightings occurring around Leesburg at night, claiming they were ghosts haunting people who lived here because the land where these homes now stand used to be part of a battlefield during the Civil War. Flash forward another couple of weeks. Late one evening, while we were lying in bed, my boyfriend's mother suddenly woke up screaming. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me that something had just attacked her. She said it looked like a skeleton, with bits of flesh still hanging from its bones, having seen nothing but the silhouette as it lunged at her. She then proceeded to tell us how, after seeing whatever this thing was, she felt like someone or something had been draining all energy out of her body for weeks leading up to now, feeling weak continuously no matter how much rest she received. This terrified both myself and my boyfriend since we had noticed changes in his mother's behavior recently, becoming more distant and less energetic than usually. Eventually, things began to improve for them though. One day, while doing some research online about hauntings around the Leesburg area, I discovered an article discussing about paranormal investigators who had been looking into claims made by people residing here experiencing strange sightings during the night. One woman they interviewed claimed to have witnessed the same type of creature I saw walking near their pond one evening. Another man mentioned similar experiences occurring when he lived nearby many years ago, stating, "I thought those days were behind us." He also added that every time he would see these things, he always felt the presence of other entities watching him too. Then there were others saying how they sometimes feel overwhelmed with a sense of dread whenever they approach certain areas around town or even just drive through the countryside alone late at night. The strangest part, however, is that no one really knows why any of these beings are here, exactly what they want from us. Are they ghosts trying to communicate a message somehow? Or maybe demons hell-bent on causing chaos in the living world? One theory suggests that there could be some sort of curse placed upon the land where these homes now stand, being built over an old battlefield. But honestly, I do not think anyone can say definitively what is going on unless they have actually experienced it firsthand, which most likely will never happen given the circumstances surrounding this whole ordeal. It turns out that there were several Civil War battles fought in and around the area. One of the major battles was the Battle of Ball's Bluff, which took place in October 1861 along the banks of the Potomac River near Leesburg. The battle resulted in heavy casualties on both sides, with many soldiers being killed or wounded. The bodies of these soldiers were buried quickly in mass graves or left unburied on the battlefield because of a lack of time and resources. Upon acquiring this information, it became clear why there would be such strong paranormal activity in the area. I additionally discovered that other people had reported similar sightings and experiences around Leesburg. There were narratives about shadow figures, odd lights, detached voices, and even encounters with what seemed to be Civil War soldiers. Some theories propose that these entities are lingering hauntings, imprints left behind by traumatic events from the past. Other theories believe they are intelligent spirits who are still trapped in this realm for some reason. It's difficult to say precisely what we encountered that night, but based on our experience as well as reports from others, it seems likely that these entities are connected to the tragic events of the war. One fact is for certain. It was an incredibly terrifying experience, and it remains unforgettable for me. Thank you again for allowing me to share my story. I'm going to keep this simple. I'm going to reveal to you some very sensitive information, so I'm going to remain anonymous. I've seen the evidence and what is happening in California. It's real. I was involved in the project to develop them, but had no idea they were being released into the wild until more recently. I began seeing strange reports of animals attacking people and pets all over California. Wild dog attacks, more specifically. The reason for their release is that there are too many, and we need to thin out the population before things get worse. The original plan, or so I was informed by my higher-ups, was to just release wolves or some other large predator back into California, like they did with Yellowstone National Park years ago. But then there was an idea that came up of creating this new breed of beings, that it would be more effective because they could reproduce so quickly. So far, from what I've heard, most of these attacks have been taking place at night near rivers or lakes, specifically in large national parks, because they're federally protected. They're very aggressive towards humans. Now, I'm not sure how much longer my job will last after disclosing this information, as we are supposed to keep everything about our work as secret as possible, even from family members. The government project that developed these beings is what we refer to as Project Zeta 2.0. And it was run by a branch organization within DARPA. The goal of the project was to create bioweapon cryptids that could be used for population control and warfare training. One of the beings they created is known as Alpha. It appears like a large dog with long, sharp teeth and claws. It has enhanced senses, including night vision, hearing, and smell. They were designed to hunt humans during the night hours. Another being they made is Beta Scavenger, which resembles something more along the lines of an ape and a reptile. These things don't have fur, just scales, generally with some spikes down their back. Somewhat similar to a stegosaurus, except much smaller than one would think. They're able to move quickly, being arboreal climbers, making them very agile, and they could leap from tree branch onto prey below, ripping through flesh with powerful jaws, and capable of slicing through bone. One last thing we worked on before my contract ended earlier this year was Omega drones. These are small insect-like beings resembling ants, with size ranging from half an inch up to 2 inches in length, depending on the stage of development. They do possess wings, allowing for flight, while also having the ability to crawl on walls, ceilings, and other surfaces easily, thanks to a special adhesive located on the underside of their bodies. This ensures grip at all times, even hanging upside down if necessary. Females lay eggs underground, hatching larvae that emerge and eventually grow into adult drones, capable of handling various tasks assigned by handlers, like scouting, locating targets, retrieving objects, etc. Omega drones are controlled remotely via a computer interface, with operators wearing headsets enabling direct communication. Most likely, the creatures being seen in California are either alpha hunters or beta scavengers. I have no idea how many were released, but based on my reports, it seems like there could be hundreds, if not thousands. Their release was likely done to test their effectiveness and see how they integrate into the environment around them. The plan is probably to use these things for population control, especially in our national parks. Now, I'm not sure what can be done, as my job was just to help develop these things. I don't know anyone else who worked on Zeta 2.0, other than a few colleagues that left after the project ended. However, I think it's important for people to know what's happening, to protect yourself whenever you're out, especially in a national park. And more importantly, if you're ever out at night, always be aware of your surroundings. I am a retired fire captain and have been an EMT for over 30 years. I was stationed in a small mountain town in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Yosemite National Park. Our district included all areas around the park, including Mariposa Grove, Wawona, El Portal, and Yosemite Valley. The local sheriff's department dispatch center or park rangers would dispatch us to any medical emergency within our jurisdictional area, including those inside Yosemite National Park. The park had its ambulance service, but they often called us for assistance when they were busy or if we could get there quicker. One night during midsummer, we received a call from a ranger who requested that we respond to assist with an incident in El Capitan Meadow. He told me that he couldn't give me any details until I arrived at his location. I drove my crew up Highway 140 towards El Capitan Meadow. It took us about 15 minutes to reach our destination. As soon as we pulled into the El Capitan picnic area parking lot, I noticed several parked vehicles with headlights illuminating one end of the large grassy field next to Bridalveil Creek. The ranger came over and said that something was going on down near Creek Bank and asked us not to turn on our flashing lights so as not to attract attention. He explained what happened. Earlier in the evening, some campers reported seeing something moving through trees along the side picnic area while walking back from Bridalveil Falls Road. They didn't think much about it, since many animals roam through this part of the valley. However, after dark, they heard strange noises from directions where the thing had gone into the woods earlier. One camper walked closer to see what was making noise, but ran back when he saw whatever was standing near the edge of the creek. He thought it was a bear, but wasn't sure. The other campers then went to their cars and turned on their headlights so they could see what it was. The ranger told me that he didn't know what the thing was since he hadn't seen it yet, but when I arrived, he would take us down to where the group had set up lights. As we walked through the trees toward the edge of the field, I noticed several people standing near their vehicles with flashlights scanning the area below them. They were talking in hushed voices, as if not wanting whatever was there to hear them. As we approached the bank of Bridalveil Creek, I saw several large boulders along its edge, making access difficult for anyone who wanted to cross into the picnic area without being seen by those above. About 10 campers gathered around one car with its high beams pointed at the opposite side of the creek. They were all staring intently at something moving among the bushes. I asked one camper if they knew what it was, and she said, "It's Bigfoot. We've been watching him for the last hour." I couldn't believe my ears. This has got to be some kind of prank or joke. I shined my flashlight across the water and onto the creature as best I could from our location. It appeared like an upright bipedal animal walking slowly back and forth behind a thick underbrush next to the tree line. It stood approximately 7-8 feet tall, with long arms swinging slightly outward as it moved. My first thought is that this is a person dressed in a gorilla suit or some type of costume trying to scare these people. But then again, why would someone do this? It just doesn't make sense. After watching for a few minutes, I realized that whoever this thing was must have tremendous strength, because branches snapped off nearby shrubs every time. Suddenly, the creature stopped moving momentarily before quickly darting into an open clearing. Standing next to a large tree, it was now directly across from us. It looked like a gorilla, but much larger and more muscular than any I've ever seen. As we continued watching, it suddenly dropped onto all fours before running towards the picnic area, where a group of campers stood in front of their cars with flashlights. My crew and I ran as fast as we could along the creek bank until we reached the clearing. We saw the creature chasing after one camper who had started returning to his car. The other campers scattered in different directions when they saw Bigfoot approaching them. I yelled out for everyone to get into vehicles and lock doors. As the camper reached his car, he fumbled, trying to find keys while being chased by this huge beast. The creature grabbed him by the shoulder, causing him to drop a flashlight, which rolled under the vehicle. The ranger quickly fired a few rounds from his shotgun, hoping to scare Bigfoot away, but it didn't seem to notice or care about shots being fired. Then, without warning, another figure appeared on the opposite side of the field. It was the second Bigfoot. I couldn't believe what I saw. 2 giant creatures chasing people through the meadow. My crew jumped into action, pulling fire extinguishers out of our truck and spraying both animals with CO2 mist, which caused them to stop momentarily before charging us instead. We backed up toward the patrol car when the first Bigfoot grabbed a boulder, hitting the windshield shattering glass. As the second one came closer, my partner sprayed it again, forcing both to retreat temporarily. I radioed dispatch, requesting additional units be sent since these creatures seemed very aggressive. Within minutes, several sheriff's deputies arrived, followed by park rangers and California Highway Patrol officers. A perimeter was established around El Capitan Meadow, keeping the public away while law enforcement personnel prepared to deal with the situation. Flashlights illuminated the entire area, providing enough light to see what was happening. Suddenly, a CHP officer drove past me, heading towards the clearing at high speed. He slammed on the brakes, then reversed direction, shining a spotlight on the ground. He jumped out of his vehicle, grabbing a shotgun from the trunk before running towards me. He said that he had just hit one of the Bigfoots with his patrol car, and it was down but still moving. I pointed him in the direction where I last saw the creature, then followed behind while radioing others about what happened. We found the injured Bigfoot lying on the ground near the creek bank. It appeared to be in a lot of pain from being struck by a CHP vehicle. The officer raised his shotgun, aiming at the animal's head, when suddenly, the second Bigfoot came charging us again. My partner sprayed CO2 mist, causing both creatures to retreat into the woods. As we watched, the first Bigfoot began crawling away, dragging its lower body across a grassy field until it disappeared under nearby bushes. Moments later, a helicopter arrived overhead, shining a spotlight down onto the area where we were standing. Several park rangers rappelled down ropes, securing the perimeter as additional units arrived. Park officials requested the immediate evacuation of all campers from El Capitan Meadow for their safety. They set up a temporary command post inside the picnic area to coordinate efforts to capture or kill these animals if necessary. A team was assembled consisting of experienced wildlife experts, armed tranquilizer guns, and dart rifles loaded with potent sedatives capable of immobilizing large mammals like bears or mountain lions. Everyone waited anxiously, hoping these two beasts could be captured alive without further injury to anyone involved. It took several hours to search surrounding forested areas using night vision goggles and thermal imaging devices, trying to locate them. After daybreak the next morning, no sign of either creature was found near El Capitan Meadow. Search teams continued looking throughout Yosemite Valley the following days, eventually locating both hiding dens along the Merced River. One den contained numerous deer carcasses, suggesting they were feeding off local wildlife and other small mammals, including rabbits, squirrels, and chipmunks. While the exact number of the total population is unknown, it is believed that at least 4 to 5 adult individuals, possibly more, live within national park boundaries. Since this incident occurred many years ago, I haven't heard any reports of similar encounters involving the Bigfoot Yosemite NP area. It's possible that these animals migrated elsewhere due to increased human activity or possibly died of natural causes. Hopefully, they're still out there somewhere, living peacefully away from people. I went to Yellowstone National Park with my girlfriend at the time. We hiked around, saw Old Faithful, and decided to hike a trail that led us down to some hot springs. We became lost on the way back up as darkness fell and we lacked flashlights. I had enough sense to tell her we needed to make camp for the night instead of continuing through dense woods in pitch blackness. We set up our tent next to this creek or stream about 10 feet away from us in what seemed like an old campground because there were remnants of old fire pits all over, with some rocks still perfectly placed where they would have been years ago. It started raining so hard later that night that it made me nervous thinking about flash flooding since we were pretty close to the river coming off of one of those mountains. Well, she passed out early from being exhausted, but I stayed awake, staring outside, listening for any sound or noise coming from anything that could potentially be dangerous. This is when things started getting weird. The rain eventually stopped falling after a couple hours, and I began hearing strange mechanical noises above my head, along with tree branches snapping and leaves rustling. The best way I can describe these mechanical sounds is by telling you if you've ever played Fallout before on Xbox, PS3, etc., then it's kind of like when you come across those Protectron robots just going haywire, repeating help every second over and over again until they see you. I sat there, shivering inside my sleeping bag, thinking something must be near because why else would this robot-sounding thing keep making noises? After sitting in silence, waiting for what felt like an eternity, this humanoid-shaped electrical outline appeared through our tent, which caused it to lighten like pulses inside our tent. It stood completely still, looking right at me, even though it didn't have eyes or facial features as far as I could tell. It was probably about 7-8 feet tall, but the head part of it seemed like a crown, with multiple points jutting out all over from the top, going down to where it would have its shoulders, while everything else below this crown looked like tentacles swaying back and forth, just like how tree branches sway when the wind blows them. The moment I laid eyes on this thing, my heart started racing faster than it ever has before. Not because I was scared, but because at that exact same moment, my girlfriend woke up screaming at me, telling me we needed to leave immediately, which caused me to feel dizzy as hell. We packed up our gear without hesitation and took off, running through the woods until daylight hit us. I told her what happened once we were far away from there, and she thought maybe it was an owl or something that got too close. So I made sure she understood how absolutely huge whatever this thing was, even though there's no way in hell an owl could get that big. She eventually gave in believing me enough, saying maybe some kind of crazy bird does exist out here. then changed the subject by asking if I felt okay still after leaving abruptly earlier, which reminded me that right when she woke up screaming, that was exactly when those strange mechanical noises stopped. We walked for hours later on, talking about anything besides last night, since neither one of us wanted to think about what might be following us now. We both agreed that not mentioning any more details other than something that did indeed happen would be best anyway. But during these long hours of hiking, feeling exhausted and nauseous whenever I looked behind myself, expecting nothing, that's when strange occurrences began to happen once more. The first time, leaves fell slowly onto the ground instead of floating straight down from the sky directly above them. They floated perfectly horizontally towards the left, along the ground, until they disappeared behind trees. The next time, I heard those mechanical noises again, but this time they were coming from a different direction than before. Finally, when I turned around to look, expecting to see another outline of a humanoid figure, I was surprised to see 3 white beams of light in the sky above us. The beams formed a triangle shape and remained stationary for several seconds before disappearing completely. I told her we needed to hurry up so she could keep moving faster, but she wouldn't listen, telling me nothing happened whenever she turned around. It wasn't until later that day, after more hours passed by without any incidents whatsoever, did I start feeling normal again, only because this crazy stuff stopped happening and never returned throughout our entire trip, at least not while hiking anyway. That night, though, as we sat near the fire eating dinner, both of us heard footsteps walking towards our campsite, but no matter how many times either one of us got up looking outside, nothing was ever there, except those weird mechanical sounds once or twice, even if they were faint now. We stayed awake talking about whatever came to mind, making sure neither one fell asleep, since that's probably what saved our lives. I can't imagine waking up with something touching you, knowing it didn't exist yesterday evening, let alone before tonight. Either way, these memories haunt me still today, along with strange radiation burns all over my legs where skin peeled off days later. Anyway, thanks for letting me share this experience. I've had many strange experiences in my life. I've always been very sensitive to the paranormal and have had many encounters with spirits, ghosts, and other entities. I have also had many UFO sightings and have even seen Bigfoot twice. I'm writing about an experience I had in 1995 while visiting a national park in the western United States. I was on vacation with my husband, and we were camping in the park. We were staying in a tent and had been there for a few days. On this particular night, we were sitting around the campfire when we noticed a strange smell in the air. It was a very strong, pungent odor that smelled like rotten eggs or sulfur. We both commented on it and wondered where it was coming from. We looked around but didn't see anything unusual. The smell seemed to be coming from all around us, but we couldn't pinpoint the source. We decided to go to bed and try to ignore it. We crawled into our sleeping bags and zipped them up tight. We were lying there for a few minutes when we heard a loud thump on the side of our tent. It sounded like something had hit it with great force. We both jumped and looked at each other in shock. Then we heard another thump, followed by several more in quick succession. It sounded like someone was pounding on the tent with their fists. The tent was shaking violently with each blow, and we were terrified. My husband unzipped the tent and stuck his head out to see what was going on, but he didn't see anything. The pounding continued for a few more seconds and then suddenly stopped. We sat there in silence, not knowing what to do next. Then we heard a low growl coming from outside the tent. It was a deep, guttural sound that sent chills down our spines. The growl lasted for a few seconds and then stopped. We were too scared to move and just lay there, listening for any more sounds. After a few minutes, we heard what sounded like heavy footsteps walking away from the tent. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, as if whatever was making them wanted us to hear them. We listened as the footsteps faded into the distance and then stopped. We didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night and eventually fell asleep. The next morning, we woke up and found large footprints all around our tent. The footprints were about 18 inches long and had 3 toes. They were very deep and looked like they had been made by something heavy. We also noticed that the ground around our tent was scorched in several places, as if something hot had been placed there. We packed up our things and left the park that day, never to return again. I have no idea what we encountered that night, but it was definitely not human. The smell, the pounding on the tent, the growling, and the footprints all point to something otherworldly. I have had many strange experiences, but this one stands out as easily one of the most terrifying. I hope you find this interesting enough that you would respond and shed some light on what we encountered that night in the national park. Thank you for taking the time to read this. I've been retired now for quite a few years. I used to work in law enforcement in the state of California. I specifically worked in the San Francisco Bay Area for over 30 years, but that's not why I'm writing. I've had some experience with Bigfoot sightings, but nothing like what is happening right now. After retiring from my agency, I was contracted by a branch of government that is not public. I guess you can call that shadow government. I was to assist in an investigation of the death of several hikers occurring near Yosemite National Park during the summer of 2013. The details are confidential at this time, though there has been some speculation on social media about these incidents. I'll let you do the research. It was determined that multiple victims were killed as a result of violent attacks by one or more Bigfoots, Sasquatch, I guess you can call them. Now, there have been many theories offered regarding these deaths, animal attacks, serial killers, etc., but it was clearly evident after examining all the evidence available, including witness statements and photographs, that only Sasquatch could be responsible. Now, this was initially covered up. I'm sure you've heard stories about other similar cases around North America, and probably more recently than ever. This seems to be increasing exponentially within the recent years. The area is in the Sierra Nevada mountains, right near a small town called Shaver Lake. The entire region has been known for Bigfoot sightings and encounters going back so many years. In fact, there have been numerous reports of violent attacks on hikers and campers in the last few decades alone, most of which were unfortunately covered up by local authorities or written off as animal attacks, and good reason. There are several reasons why this area seems to be a hotbed. You have dense forest cover with limited access and a lot of foliage. There's an abundance of wildlife and food. It's very remote. The altitude alone, the climate, fresh water sources, and lastly, its history. Now, in addition to these factors, it should also be noted that Native American tribes who have long believed that this region is sacred ground and inhabited by wild men who guard their territory very fiercely. Now, I can tell you from my own experience investigating these cases that there was no doubt about what had occurred at each crime scene. The victims' injuries were consistent with those caused by large primates, or Sasquatch. It was determined through DNA analysis that multiple individuals were involved in some instances. The problem we faced during our investigation was getting local law enforcement agencies to cooperate fully. They seemed more interested in covering up the incidents than solving them. As I mentioned prior, I'm bound not to disclose specific details regarding the findings until such time as they are declassified. Trust me, if I give away too much, well, I don't want to out myself. Now, I will say this. The situation involving these beings and the violence against humans appears to be escalating, as well as the rate of cover-ups. Now, there may come a point when it becomes impossible for, at least on a public level, the governments to deny all levels of their existence. Oh, one last thing I'll add to this is that Yosemite has a large death count from unknown wild dogs. This, of course, is covered up from public attention. But I can tell you that there has been a number of hiker deaths in Yosemite National Park and the surrounding area that are all attributed to wild dogs. I believe these attacks are actually being carried out by large bipedal canines. Now, there is a plethora of evidence to suggest this, including witness statements and photographs, none of which are ever available to the public. These cases have also been covered up. The problem with these incidents is that they're often dismissed as accidents. Unfortunately, the truth is much more sinister. I'm sorry I can't give more information, but I hope that this information helps shed at least some light on what's currently happening in California. I've been a fan of your YouTube for many years now, and I appreciate that you post accounts without sensationalizing them, which is very refreshing. I had an experience when I was only 16 in 1972, the year before my family moved to another state. It has really been bothering me ever since. My father worked as a chemist at a redacted near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He loved his job but hated the area we lived in because he felt too crowded with people and industry. One day, he came home from work quite excited about something that happened during his lunchtime walk on company property. He mentioned that there were rumors among some employees about strange sightings deep within a nearby national park. A few workers claimed they saw what appeared to be, now I kid you not, small dinosaurs moving through heavy brush near one of the trails. During his lunch break, Dad decided to take a walk along one of those paths. While hiking, he heard rustling coming from thick underbrush to his right. As he stopped and listened intently, several little dinosaur-like creatures emerged onto the path ahead. These beings seemed oblivious or unconcerned by my father's presence. They continued their slow pace across the trail and vanishing into more undergrowth on the other side. They looked like tiny versions of T-Rex, standing only 2 feet tall with short arms similar to those found on their larger relatives. His description indicated these miniature T-Rexes had feathers covering most parts of their body, except for the head and neck areas. It wasn't until after listening to later reports about encounters between humans and unknown cryptids, including ones resembling dinosaurs, that I realized my father had witnessed such an event. But there's more to the story. Several weeks before he shared this, my sister mentioned seeing large birds flying over our house in the early morning hours. She thought they might be hawks, though she wasn't sure because she couldn't see well in the darkened sky. We lived approximately 10 miles away from where Father saw those little dinosaurs. Dad didn't even believe my sister's story at the time, thinking she was just making it up. My sister and I never mentioned her sighting to him again until after he shared his experience during his lunch break. Now, his description of these things seemed identical to what my sister had seen flying over the house in the early morning. The distance between the sightings indicated these creatures traveled a great distance overnight. There were no other reports about such cryptids in the local news or any newspaper that we knew of. The rumors around this company quickly faded. I've always wondered if anyone else ever witnessed similar things in the area. I've heard of other dinosaur reports down in New Guinea and even parts of Arizona and New Mexico, but never this far north. The fact that this happened so long ago doesn't lessen its impact on me. My dad passed away several years later, but before doing so, He made us promise not to tell anyone, especially my mother, about his encounter with mini T-Rexes. As far as I know, nobody outside our family heard Dad's story, until now, assuming you choose to read this. Thank you for providing an outlet to share strange encounters like this one. This has been very cathartic writing this down. I have an extremely long story to tell you. A few years ago, my mother and stepfather left the city and moved into a large house on 30 acres in the country in Virginia. The property was largely made up of forest, featuring a small field in front. My mom would always see strange things at night while walking her dog. She saw weird eyes glowing in the trees or tall shadowy figures running around through them. They live about 20 minutes away from civilization, so they don't really have any neighbors except for one family that lives down the road. The people who lived there before us were apparently Satanists, and we found pentagrams drawn all over our basement walls when we first moved in. A couple of months after relocating there, my brother and I ventured outside one evening because he wanted to reveal something he had discovered by their pond earlier that day. It appeared to be some sort of massive tooth, though we were uncertain which animal it had belonged to. The sun had recently descended, hence it was not utterly dark yet, however, one could still clearly see the stars. We heard hefty footsteps originating from somewhere behind us towards where our backyard concluded, and we turned around to investigate. We didn't observe anything, however, so we resumed our conversation about whatever else we had been discussing before the interruption. When we continued our conversation, the face of my brother became pale as a ghost. He directed his finger towards what appeared like thin air very near to us, saying, "Look, look." I asked him, "What? What are you looking at?" He replied, "There's someone standing right there," pointing his finger directly at whatever he was seeing. At this point, I'm thinking he's trying to scare me or mess with me somehow. I told him that if anyone was actually standing right next to us, then why didn't he say something to them? So he did. He said, "Hey, who are you?" After a couple of seconds of silence, my brother started panicking, saying, oh shoot, it's coming at us." I'm still looking around trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And then I heard a low growl come from where he was pointing. That made me turn back towards him immediately, and I saw whatever it was lunging at my brother. It knocked him over onto his ass, but didn't attack him any further than that. I grabbed my brother by his arm, and we ran as fast as we could back into our house. Once inside, both of us were entirely silent for about 10 minutes, until finally one of us spoke up, questioning the other if they had just witnessed what happened. After confirming with each other that we both observed this entity leap at my brother without actually making an attack, it seemed like its intention was to frighten more than anything else. We ascended and locked ourselves in our room. The rest of the night carried on without any events until it was time to sleep. Neither one of us had a sound sleep that night. Since this incident, my fixation has grown on discovering what assaulted my brother that night. So whenever I visit home, which isn't often anymore due to my full-time job in Virginia Beach, these visits occur because my parents now reside in Georgia. It was on the night of February 7th, 2015. The full moon had just risen above the tree line when I first saw it standing there in front of me. It looked like a rotting, skeletal werewolf-looking creature that was about as tall as me. Its fur seemed to be falling off, and its skin appeared gray with black spots all over it. The head was large and misshapen, with long ears sticking out from both sides, almost resembling those of a bat. Its mouth hung open, showing sharp yellow teeth, while its eyes were glowing bright red. It had arms that reached down past its knees, ending in long clawed fingers. I immediately grabbed my phone out of my pocket to take a picture, but before I could get one good shot off, it turned around and ran away into the trees behind our house. When I told my mom what happened, She didn't believe me at first until I showed her some pictures online that people had taken of similar creatures that looked exactly like what we saw. The experience has affected us greatly ever since then because now we're constantly on edge whenever we go outside after dark or even during daylight hours sometimes too. I do not know if this thing is supernatural or not, but whatever it is, no one should ever have to deal with something like this, attacking them or their family members without knowing why. It seems like no one else really believes us, so maybe they are right. Maybe we did imagine everything. Maybe it never actually happened at all. When we relocated to the house, pentagrams were sketched all over the basement walls. The past owners of the property seemed to have been involved in Satanism, which led us to suspect they might have opened a passage or similar that enabled whatever assaulted my brother to enter. I also felt the need to add that prior to our first encounter, there was perpetually an unnerving sensation when stepping out at night. It was as though something was observing you from the midst of the trees, but glowing eyes were the only signs of presence we could ever detect. Regarding what it actually is, I do not know if it's supernatural or not, but based on other people's experiences with similar beings, I would say it's probably some sort of demon. My mother did research online after our encounter and discovered skinwalkers, which seem pretty similar in description, except they're allegedly Native American shapeshifters. I do not know if any Native Americans lived around here, though, so maybe it was just a coincidence. Regardless, I still bring my camera with me every time I visit home, just in case something happens again. Because even though nobody else believes us, we know what we saw happened, and it was not at all a dream, hallucination, or anything like that. The creature has haunted our dreams ever since then as well, because sometimes when we close our eyes at night, all we can visualize are those bright red eyes looking back at us. Perhaps one day someone will finally capture evidence of these entities on film, so people cease assuming everyone who alleges to have witnessed them is insane. This happened to me in 2009. I was a seasonal employee for the National Park Service and worked at Yosemite National Park during the summer months, living in a dormitory with employees of all ages worldwide. The first part of my story could be attributed to an overactive imagination, but it's worth mentioning since there are so many stories about Bigfoot being seen around national parks. A couple of weeks into working there, we had a big meeting with everyone who worked on Park Service grounds to discuss safety and rules. They told us not to go out alone after dark because mountain lions have been known to attack people and carry them off. They also said if you encounter one, do not run away, or it will chase you down. Well, one night after work, some friends and I decided we wanted ice cream, so we walked down towards Curry Village, where stores open late. It wasn't very far from our dorms, but it was through some wooded areas with trails. We got our ice cream and then started walking back towards our dorms, which meant going uphill through these woods. It got darker as time passed until someone finally said, "Hey guys, maybe we should hurry up." So now we're speed walking up this trail when suddenly one of my friends stops dead in his tracks. My heart sank into my stomach as I turned around, expecting certain death, only to see what looked like two glowing red eyes standing on top of a large rock above us, watching silently before darting away quickly once noticed. We ran back home faster than any Olympic sprinter ever has, but I still think about this sometimes and wonder what the hell we saw that night. The next part of my story is more disturbing than anything else. I don't know how many people are aware of this, but Yosemite National Park has a very high number of suicides each year. They try to keep these things hush-hush to not deter tourists from coming, but everyone who works there knows about them. One day in late June or early July, they had an all-employee meeting with park rangers, discussing recent incidents involving suicides and warning us about how to handle such situations if we were ever unfortunate enough to come across one ourselves. Well, a few days later, after work, some friends and I decided we wanted pizza, so we walked down towards Curry Village again, where restaurants open late. It was dark since our shift ended at 10 p.m., and we all had to get ready before leaving. We got our pizza and then started walking back home, which meant going uphill through those same woods from before, only now in complete darkness, except for the moonlight shining through the trees above us. As we're walking along chatting casually, someone says, "Hey guys, look over there," pointing off into the distance near one of those large rocks where people can be seen climbing during daylight hours. At first, we noticed nothing out of place until suddenly someone gasped loudly. That's when I saw him lying face down on top of that rock, motionless, as if dead or seriously injured. His body looked twisted in unnatural ways, making me cringe just thinking about what kind of pain he must have been feeling. There was no way to tell from where we were standing if he was alive, but none of us wanted to get any closer for fear of finding out. We stood there frozen in shock, unsure what to do next, when suddenly someone said we should go get help. So that's exactly what we did. We ran back down towards Curry Village as fast as our legs would carry us, until finally a park ranger came running over and asked what the problem was. We told him everything, then led him back up through those woods towards the rock where we saw the guy lying motionless, only now he wasn't there anymore. The ranger searched around with his flashlight while telling us it must have been some kind of prank before walking away, shaking his head like we were just a bunch of kids making things up. I'll never forget that night or how helpless I felt, knowing there was nothing more I could do. My husband and I had a strange experience while visiting a national park in the US. We were driving through an area of the park that was densely forested with large, old trees. It was mid-afternoon on a clear day. As we drove along, my husband noticed something odd about one of the trees off to our right. He said it looked like there was someone standing behind it and thought they might be in trouble because they were leaning over at an awkward angle. I turned around to look, but all I could see were tree trunks, so I told him not to worry about it. As we continued down the road, my husband kept looking back at the tree. Now he seemed very concerned, so I finally asked him what he saw. Hesitantly, he explained that he thinks there was somebody hiding behind the tree. Then suddenly his eyes got really big and his face went white as a sheet, and he exclaimed, "Oh my God," and hit the gas pedal hard, causing us both to lurch forward violently. We sped away from there as fast as possible. When I asked what happened, he just kept saying how scared he was, but he wouldn't explain why until later. When we finally calmed down enough for him to talk about it without getting too upset again, this is what happened. After seeing something weird near that tree, which appeared normal for now, out of nowhere, another figure appeared to be standing next to where he originally saw someone leaning over. The new figure had bright red hair, which hung below its shoulders. It wore tattered clothing made up of mostly rags or animal skins. Its arms hung loosely by its side. The thing stood motionless, staring straight ahead. Then suddenly, its head turned toward us. My hubby described how when their eyes met, well, he felt like whatever this was somehow knew everything about him instantaneously. He also sensed malevolence coming from it, as though being scanned. At any rate, once their gazes locked, my husband felt this overwhelming urge to flee, like his life was in danger. I can't say what it was, but I believe him because of how scared he looked. It really shook him up. We never saw anything like that after this. The whole experience still gives me chills, and my husband, he doesn't like to talk about it. In fact, he refused to give me any more details when I was trying to write this down. I could tell it makes him very uncomfortable. I am so happy I found your YouTube. Thank you for the service you provide. My sighting occurred in Virginia, specifically just outside of Warrenton in Fauquier County. The encounter happened at approximately 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night. I was driving home from work and had just turned onto my road, which is very rural with lots of fields and trees. There are only 2 houses within a mile or so of where this took place. It was very dark out that night, but there were no clouds covering the moon, which provided quite a bit of light, even though it wasn't full. The first thing I noticed as I came around the bend before our driveway was that something large and white darted across the road ahead, then quickly jumped over to my side before running into an open field along our property line. As soon as it cleared in front of me, what appeared to be another one did exactly the same thing, but this time stopped right in front of me, blocking my path entirely. This creature stood about 6 feet tall, hunched over slightly with arms down by its sides. Its head seemed huge and disproportionate to its body. Its fur was pure white all over, except for black tips on each hair, making it look spiky up close. The ears were long and pointed, like a German shepherd's would be when they're standing straight up. His face looked somewhat wolf-like, but also resembled some sort of primate, although there definitely weren't any apes running around Fauquier County at this time, at least that I'm aware of. Very broad shoulders tapered down to slim hips, not muscular per se, more streamlined than anything else. When he finally moved aside, allowing me to pass, his demeanor became almost comical, like an "oops, sorry." Then he ran off after his companion, leaving me alone, completely stunned behind him. Once inside, we have motion sensor lights all around our house, so nothing could get near without being illuminated. Inside, we heard them circling through different parts of our yard, occasionally stopping to sniff the air, we assumed. They never came near our house or tried to get in, which was a relief. I have dogs and didn't want them harmed by these things. They stayed around for about 30 minutes, then just vanished. I've seen them again since, but not nearly as close up or for as long a period of time. It's strange because this happened on an extremely busy road that leads from Route 17 over to Route 29, yet no one else has ever reported seeing anything like this. Thank you for taking the time to read my story, and if you would like any further details, please don't hesitate to ask. Oh, and one more thing. If you're ever driving around outside at night, just be careful. Try and be as aware as you possibly can. I mean, these things could be anywhere. I wanted to let you know about a bizarre event that occurred this past weekend while camping in the Yellowstone backcountry. This is an unclassified occurrence, and I believe it was our bad luck at being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was on Saturday morning, around 6:30 a.m. A bear expert advised me not to file this with any park personnel, so I do not want anyone to think we are making up such events. But due to my own concern over the safety of others and their enjoyment of Yellowstone NP, I felt I needed advice from someone in authority, as all hikers should be aware. I heard what sounded like rustling grass down from where our campsite was located along Soda Butte Creek, near Slough Creek Campground. At first light, myself and 2 other people began preparing breakfast when one friend came running towards us, warning of grisly activity rapidly approaching upriver about 50 yards below us. The grizzly charged straight into an adjacent fishing area occupied by a fly fisherman who yelled loudly and tried his best to hit it with his rod. Upon impact, the grizzly dropped onto all fours, sniffed the air, intensely shook its head, and walked quickly toward him. A crowd started forming and shouting at it, waving their arms. However, most people were probably more concerned with taking photographs than trying to prevent some mishap. Moments later, one young boy tried approaching closer, stumbling only 15 feet across rough terrain, slipping, falling forward, tumbling several times, desperately scrambling, backing away again, and shouting repeatedly. At that moment, we heard 3 rifle shots echoing nearby. Suddenly, 4 wranglers emerged from behind, shooting high above and aiming beyond the tall evergreens. They seemed startled. So, having left the Angus Cabin Leasing stable facility already, we encountered groups heading westward and northwest over the parkway carrying heavy antlers. A herd separated each moose, seemingly reluctant for whatever reason, heading northeast uphill, quietly rejoining. Thinking maybe feeding hot spring pools scattered close by, perhaps warming them. No snow or ice on the ground, so probably thermal energy reserves weakened from winter while seemingly close-knit remaining friendly. The immediate danger was apparently over once rangers drove down the road, pushing their motorcycles parking by the riverside closer to Slough Creek Ranger Station. But, in fact, they could not locate or scare it away permanently just yet. Therefore, be aware that such an encounter was temporary at best, unfortunately. Our gear had been ripped apart left of the kitchen area several feet below, a bag being taken out about 20 to 25 yards further, where heavy underbrush provided ample cover for something rummaging through food packets, unzipping 2 tents there and ripping another badly. It also appeared strange, which might have deterred animal consumption, leaving it unfinished, nevertheless interesting. Sorry, this is a long-winded email and has run off track somewhat. Feel free to edit, please. Should you use parts if needed. Fearful for other tourists staying overnight camping alone during spring bear encounters, given the info above, because precautions can always help prevent possible injuries. I personally believe everyone should avoid remote areas when grizzly bears are near, like right now, especially early mornings, as they do attack, often charging without provocation. Since none of us know why most experts disagree concerning park regulations forcing proper disposal, non-resident visitors should hang coolers high up into trees, hopefully attracting attention from others and cautioning carelessness. Also about keeping clear bags empty on the front porch nearest the site. I certainly hope that officials instruct campsites to dispose of hot coals in public bins. Officials should clean these bins each morning to prevent garbage accumulation after breakfast. Officials should collect the coals from noon through the evening and burn them towards dusk. It is important for officials to notice the presence of charcoal and replace the ashes, as this will help prevent similar attacks in the future. However, a major concern is that we now acknowledge the need to take immediate steps whenever there is a risk of being attacked, ensuring that visitors can help everyone by always reporting bear activity sightings, including footprints. Hearing smells, blood, rotting meat, and general waste are obvious common sense. It's worth stating their importance for public awareness. Sorry for having interrupted my message and briefly returned it, mentioning quite a lot already. If necessary, report it. Otherwise, sorry this email ran so long while providing specific information regarding what I felt others should be aware of until authorities act with due caution. This happened several months ago. Seeking help to understand what my girlfriend and I encountered. This has left both of us very shaken. Last September, we went camping in the Allegheny National Forest for just 2 nights. Our campsite was at Willow Bay Campground, also known as Sugar Bay. That night, we found ourselves the sole campers in the chilly, clear night. The small campground consists of 2 loops, each holding roughly 10 campers, but one loop was closed. Now, we had visited this park many times, yet this time, our electric campsite was nestled among trees, some quite close to our tent. On Saturday night, we lit a fire and stayed out until around 10 p.m. before retiring to our tent. Sometime during the night, Approximately at 1:30 a.m., we were abruptly awakened by loud snapping sounds and the breaking of trees outside our tent. We heard low guttural growls accompanying these noises, suggesting the presence of something, maybe two creatures. In an attempt to understand better, we quietly got dressed, opened the rainfly, and lay down to listen. The sounds seemed to be made by large mammals, possibly larger given the volume of the noise. At one point, I thought I heard muffled conversation between these creatures as they moved off towards other sites, about 200 yards away. This seemed impossible, though, as any humans would have been in the path of these creatures. Trying to peer into the starless night through the foil-like stargate of our tent's front fly entrance, we crouched under this 6-inch wide, doorless, non-braced portal. Then, quite suddenly, these beings departed. Trees waved around, and small evergreens in front of our tent were pushed back by huge masses of these beings rolling trees or logs into the mix. This was followed by 4 loud, forceful strikes, and then silence. This is a gentleman living nearby who you might know, and I've considered calling him. However, my girlfriend is opposed to reaching out, preferred to keep this hidden from our children and others for now, which seems normal. But I respect your no-nonsense investigative approach, something both my family and hers appreciate in all the data. So, do you have any ideas about what we witnessed? Please, I beg you, keep our names private. This is a very long story, so please bear with me and read the whole thing. It happened when I was about 14 years old, back in the summer of 2010. I live in Northern Virginia, but my family has a vacation house on Smith Mountain Lake in Southern Virginia. We have had it for over 20 years, and I've been going there every summer since before I can remember. The area around SML is heavily wooded and hilly or mountainous. There are lots of deer that roam around, as well as other wildlife such as black bears and bobcats. My dad told me once he saw a cougar up on one of the mountain roads while driving to our house, which isn't too far from his spot. So anyway, this happened in late July or early August, after we got back from dinner at some local restaurant by boat, which we do often because it's more fun than driving all the way into town. After eating out, we usually take a short ride around parts of the lake just to look at stuff until it gets dark. This particular night had clear skies, so you could see everything really well, even though there wasn't much moonlight yet, being that it was still somewhat light out. We were cruising along near an area called R19, if anyone knows SML pretty well. If not, basically, R19 is kind of across from Mitchell Point, where they hold the Great American 4th of July fireworks show each year. Anyways, as we're slowly riding along enjoying ourselves, my mom, who's sitting towards the front, starts freaking out and pointing off towards the shore, saying, "What is that?" and trying to get our kids' attention, so naturally everyone looks. It took me a second or two because she pointed almost straight ahead instead of directly left where the shore actually was, but once I saw it, I could make out a large figure standing on 2 legs by the tree line about 50 to 60 feet from the shore. The thing was easily over 7 feet tall and dark brown or black in color with long hair all over its body. It had a huge head with pointy ears and an elongated snout muzzle area like a dog or wolf, but it definitely wasn't either of those things. The thing also appeared to have massive arms and hands hanging down almost to its knees, which were bent forward as if leaning towards us slightly. Now, when my mom first pointed this thing out, she screamed, "Bigfoot!" So we kids just started laughing because none of us believed her, including myself at the time. Then, my dad, who was driving, stopped the boat, saying he wanted to see for himself what everyone else was looking at. Once he finally saw it, though, his face went pale white, and he said, "That's no Bigfoot." My dad has always been one of those skeptical types who needs physical proof before believing anything, so his reaction like that really scared me. I remember asking him, "What do you think it is then?" And his response still haunts me today. He said, "I don't know exactly, but I've heard stories around here about some kind of monster living up in these woods, thinking this thing might come swim out into the water where our boat is." So anyways, as we're sitting there watching this creature not moving much, besides swaying back and forth slowly, sort of rocking side to side while making these low growling noises, another smaller figure comes walking up behind the bigger one. This second creature appeared to be similar in shape and size, only shorter, maybe 6 feet tall instead. We didn't get a good look at this new arrival because it was still light out and they were standing in the tree-lined shadows. It seemed to be a little more active than the other one, moving around almost like pacing back and forth. However, we couldn't see much else besides its outline, really due to poor lighting conditions. As time went on, both of these things eventually walked off deeper into the woods, but not before letting out these high-pitched screeching sounds that made our ears hurt. Once they disappeared, my dad quickly started up the boat engine and took us home without saying another word about what just happened. The next day, I asked him if he believed those things were real or not, and all he said was yes. So now I'm scared even more, thinking we're going to get eaten by some kind of monster while staying at SML House. Luckily, nothing bad ever happened during the rest of my vacation there, but every night after dinner ride, me and my sister would keep an eye out for anything weird near shore. That's pretty much the end of the story, except to say none of us told anyone else about this experience until years later, when I brought it up with Mom, who confirmed everything exactly as remembered. It looked like a giant, hair-covered monster. I couldn't tell you exactly what it was, though, because it was still too light out and they were standing in the shadows of the trees, so we didn't get a great look at them. I think about this experience often and how lucky we are to have made it back home safely that night. It's also made me question things more than I used to, especially when it comes to the supernatural or unexplained events or creatures living among us today. My dad always told me there was no such thing as a monster, but now he believes differently since seeing those things on SML that night. He says they could be some kind of undiscovered animal species, or maybe even something supernatural, which scares him more than anything else. Thankfully, nothing bad ever happened during the rest of my vacation there, but every night after dinner ride, my sister and I would keep an eye out for anything weird near the shore. This is back in 2013, when me and my wife and my brother-in-law and his wife were in the state of New Mexico. They live in the town of Alamogordo, which is near the White Sands National Monument. My wife and I had never been to this area before, so we were looking forward to seeing the sights. We had been there for a few days and had already visited the White Sands Monument, which was quite impressive. My brother-in-law suggested that we visit the nearby Lincoln National Forest. He told us that there were some nice trails and a few lakes where we could picnic and fish. So, on this particular day, we packed up some food and drinks and headed out to the forest. It was about a 30-minute drive from their home. We arrived at the forest around 10 a.m. The weather was clear and sunny, with a temperature of about 75 degrees, or, if you're in Celsius, 24. We drove around for a while until we found a nice spot near one of the lakes. There were a few other people fishing along the shore, but it wasn't crowded at all. We got out our fishing gear and began to set up on a small dock that jutted out into the lake. I was excited because I hadn't fished in years. My wife was happy just to relax and enjoy the scenery around us. We were sitting on our chairs for about an hour when I noticed something strange in the sky above us. It looked like a black balloon or something similar, but it was moving slowly in one direction, then would stop for a few seconds before moving again. I pointed it out to my wife, who also thought it was strange. We watched it for about 5 minutes when it suddenly shot off into the distance at an incredible speed. It was gone within seconds. We were both amazed by what we had just witnessed. We talked about it for a while and then went back to fishing. We were sitting there for another hour or so when I noticed something moving in the trees across the lake from us. It was about 100 yards away. I couldn't make out what it was at first, but then I saw that it was a large black figure walking on 2 legs. It was covered in hair and was very tall. I pointed it out to my wife, who also saw it as well. We were both scared and didn't know what to do. The figure was moving slowly through the trees and seemed to be looking for something. We watched it for about 5 minutes when it suddenly stopped and turned toward us. It seemed to be sniffing the air as it had caught our scent. We were both frozen with fear and didn't move a muscle. The figure stood there for a few seconds before turning and walking away into the woods. We sat there for a while, not knowing what to do. Eventually, we packed up our gear and left. We didn't tell my brother-in-law about what we had seen because we thought he would think we were crazy. We never went back to that lake again during our visit, but we did go back to the forest a few more times before we left New Mexico. We never saw anything strange again, but we always felt like we were being watched while we were there. I don't know what we saw that day, but I believe it was some kind of Bigfoot creature. I have read about them before, and this thing fit the description perfectly. I also believe that the black balloon-like object we saw earlier was some kind of UFO or drone that was monitoring us. It's all very strange and hard to believe, but I know what I saw, and so does my wife. I've been contracted by several military entities since 2007. I have a security clearance and unfortunately cannot disclose my employer or specific locations. In early September of 2013, while on duty at our facility, which is located in the state of California, I have witnessed an object that appeared over the hills about 1 mile from where we were located. I was outside having a smoke break with 2 other employees, we'll call them, when one of them noticed something moving above the tree line on top of the hill across from us. The sun had just set, but there was still some light left in the sky. We all looked towards this area and saw what seemed like 3 large orange orbs hovering close together. It was almost as if they were attached to each other. The size of these objects is difficult to determine since it wasn't completely dark, but I would guess they may have been between 5 to 10 feet wide. Now, they remained stationary for about 5 minutes before very slowly descending behind the trees and out of view. Now, as soon as we realized that these weren't normal aircraft lights, since we see plenty around here, we notified one of our supervisors, who then contacted security. Now, it took several days before any real information regarding this sighting reached us. Informally speaking with another employee who has access to certain files, he mentioned that similar sightings occurred within only weeks prior, though nothing definitive could be determined. There are many people working here who do not know anything about UFOs, or simply don't believe such things could exist. But after seeing these objects myself, let's just say you can count me among those now, looking up into the night sky more often than usual. I've always been a skeptic, especially when it comes to extraterrestrials, thinking that most sightings were simply misidentified aircraft or natural phenomena easily explained away. But after seeing these strange orange orbs in the sky, let's just say that I feel like there's more going on. The area where I witnessed the orbs is located in California, as I've stated previously. Unfortunately, I cannot give any more specifics. The facility where I work is situated on a hilltop overlooking a valley with rolling hills and mountains beyond that. The immediate vicinity of our location consists of mostly undeveloped land with some residential areas scattered around. There are also several other military facilities nearby. In regards to other sightings or experiences in this same area, there have been quite a few stories circulating. One person, who I will not name, has worked at this particular location for many years. And in fact, they informed me about a particular incident that happened all the way back in 1992. A group of people were standing outside during lunch break when they noticed what appeared to be 3 metallic spheres hovering above one of the hills. Now, these objects seemed much larger than those that we saw, possibly as large as trucks, according to this witness. After hovering for several minutes, these spheres suddenly shot up in the sky at an incredible speed before simply vanishing. I've also heard similar accounts from others who claim to have seen strange lights or even objects moving through the air. It seems like most sightings occur during the late evening hours, but there have been daytime reports too. There's another story involving 2 different security guards who were stationed at the entrance gate. They reported seeing what looked like a large black triangle hovering very low near the trees, right near their post one evening. This was back in 2009, I believe, so I'm not sure if it's entirely related, but I thought it was worth mentioning since you have talked about black triangles. Several people working here believe these incidents may be connected somehow, just due to the similarities between them. Oh, it's also worth noting the fact that the base security has increased patrols throughout the surrounding areas following our experiences, so there must be something going on. I've worked in this park for well over 25 years now, and have experienced things that most people don't even believe exist or think are extinct. I was going on one of my daily rounds when I saw something fly from the trees down below into another set of trees ahead. The bird didn't seem normal at all. It had an enormous wingspan and made a high-pitched screeching sound. My first thought was, there is no way this is real. At this point, I thought it might be some new species. But what else could it be? After seeing this thing again about 5 minutes later while driving towards Grant Village, you couldn't miss it as it swooped across the road in front of me to disappear into more tree cover right off the road near Shoshone Lake. Well, fast forward 2 weeks, and word has gotten around among some of us rangers about someone sighting giant bat-like creatures with red eyes. So there's talk among us that maybe they aren't birds, but actual living beings. At work, everyone refers to these supposed birds as demons, not because they're evil, but because their looks remind them too much of demons, according to Dante Alighieri. Now fast forward 6 months, we received a report of a possible murder near our station around the West Thumb Geyser Basin. It turns out those red-eyed bats and demons were found eating part of a grizzly bear's carcass. I'm not gonna lie, I pissed myself before firing off 4 rounds at them, only for them to disperse for brief moments before flying away in different directions once more. During that whole time period, wildlife inside and outside the forest went quiet and eerily silent. That night, however, the animals, including grizzlies, began getting louder. The grizzlies roared loudly every half hour, seemingly still scared. On edge till daybreak, I did hear those red-eyed things in the trees again with a low grunting and an occasional squeak as they devoured the remaining bear meat off their chosen tree or whatever. Thankfully, they disappeared at some point because I stopped hearing them, maybe when dawn broke. I can tell you this. The fear that these bat-like creatures brought me that night still haunts my mind to this day. However, upon reflection, we realized that they did not pursue us. Their sole intention was to devour the remaining bears, which had been attacked by an unidentified creature. distinct from wolves. So, no, it wasn't anything close to a werewolf. Don't get me wrong, though. We, or anyone else, never saw this thing. This unknown thing clearly took down several grizzlies, since none of them left bite marks in each other's wounds. Although I suspect someone may have fired a round for caution or fun, no bullet holes were found. Due to the vastness of Yellowstone, any reports we hear from the northern region near West Thumb would likely be dismissed. I've had other colleagues who've spotted this thing. Most are too afraid to even mention what they've seen, let alone report it. One of the stories goes like this. Apparently, a tourist group went missing one time while hiking around Geyser Hill. Some think it was those bat demons, as people call them, that took them off somewhere. Others say maybe wolves got them, but I can tell you, nobody knows for sure. Anyhow, their campfire kept burning when rangers found their gear, but no sign of tourists disappeared altogether. A few days later, the Forest Lake fire threatened to rapidly spread down into the West Thumb Basin. Authorities deemed the area unsafe and pulled several other workers, including me, from our posts, instructing us to evacuate immediately. Later, I found out that our own boss saw these bat demons flying overhead before getting away themselves. However, no one has mentioned that day since then, as the news never broke. Another ranger, whose name I will not disclose for privacy reasons, witnessed this thing feeding on the corpse of a hiker. She saw it with her own eyes. Someone partially ate the body, and signs of struggle were nearby. We found bloodstains on the ground and tree branches broken off from a fight. The authorities tried to cover up these incidents because they didn't want to cause panic among tourists or have people stop visiting Yellowstone. I personally believe that this creature is responsible for many of the missing persons cases in Yellowstone and possibly other national parks as well. These cases are eerie in their similarities. Bodies found without any obvious cause of death, no signs of animal predation, and strange circumstances surrounding their disappearance. What scares me even more is that we don't know what this thing really is or where it came from. All I know is that it's real, it's dangerous, and we need to be vigilant when patrolling the park. Higher-ups who refuse to acknowledge their existence, dismiss our sightings as hallucinations or misidentifications. An unknown monster lurks in our national parks, and there is little information about its behavior or the best way to deal with it. All I can say is that if you ever find yourself in one of these areas, stay alert and be cautious, especially at night. Keep your distance from wildlife and report anything unusual you see. It could save your life. Have there been sightings? Yes. Do I think all 411 missing are results of cryptids? No. Sometimes those people disappear into thin air. How long did most encounters last? It is hard to tell because some experiences seem longer than others. Is Bigfoot Sasquatch involved? This guy eats deer like nothing. Where do most occurrences happen within national parks? Usually in dense forests, it is away from populated areas. However, big cities aren't immune to it either. Is there any other correlation that we know of between people who went missing? The missing person tends to be an average male in his late teens or early 20s, but others are just kids. What happens after you come back? Do they treat you like crazy? Do they keep it quiet for your safety? Usually both. It really depends on who reports and what position or authority rank said individual has. Can I ask why this happened, and were these things dangerous? Why would a demon kill for meat rather than a man eating cryptid, a Wendigo, werewolf, or Sasquatch? No one knows if they are demons for certain, as we don't have evidence to support such claims other than how the beast looks. Hence why many park rangers refer to them as demons per Dante Alighieri's works, although I've heard various names, including bat monsters or devils, given their red eyes resembling classic Western depictions of devils. Were the park rangers told about this encounter by their superiors? Some of my colleagues remain uninformed and dismiss the bat demon stories as baseless hearsay. That's not uncommon, though, even within small groups. Amazingly few reports about my encounters have reached authorities since folks here dismiss sightings. Even if someone sees something unusual, chances are high that no one will take notice until multiple people report the same thing independently, like what occurred in August or September. Are there any actual Bigfoot sightings there, according to the locals? Yes, indeed. There have been plenty of stories reported through the decades, usually involving tourists going camping near remote lakes inside forested areas. However, locals also tend to see them now and then when hunting at dusk or dawn. How often do these disappearances occur outside of Yellowstone National Park? Since news hardly ever makes national headlines, let alone statewide, most people probably aren't aware of missing persons happenings, thus making them more frequent events elsewhere due to decreased surveillance compared to national parks and forests in general. Were any hikers actually found dead, or were they just considered missing? Good question. In some cases, hikers' bodies were discovered after a significant amount of time, but not in the immediate area where they disappeared, while in other instances, people simply vanished without a trace. What do I think it is? I honestly don't know. It could be anything, really. Interdimensional, unknown, cryptid, or something we have yet to even classify. Like Mothman at Point Pleasant back then, my colleagues and I have discussed this theory before. Occult rituals can potentially summon or invite these creatures into our world, especially if they are not native to our realm. Many Native American tribes still practice spiritual rituals and traditions with a long history. However, it's important to note that this is just speculation at this point. We don't have enough evidence to definitively say what these creatures are or where they come from. All we know is that they exist and they pose a threat to both wildlife and humans. Tracing the origin or identifying the exact individuals who brought these creatures into our realm, if they were indeed summoned through an occult ritual, would be extremely difficult. It's also possible that these creatures have been around for much longer than we realize, lurking in the shadows until now. In any case, I believe it's crucial for us as park rangers and caretakers of national parks to remain vigilant and continue reporting sightings or encounters with these bat-like creatures so that we can gather more information about their behavior and patterns and potentially find ways to mitigate the dangers they pose. I hope my response was helpful. If you have any further questions or thoughts on this topic, please let me know. I'm always interested in discussing these mysteries with fellow enthusiasts. I'm a former park ranger and naturalist who worked in Yosemite National Park during the 1990s. As a seasonal employee at Yosemite, I had numerous strange encounters with people and animals which were never explained or reported by the park administration or rangers. One of these experiences happened on June 25, 1995. At approximately 10 p.m. that evening, while walking back to my tent after having dinner at one of the mess halls located near Curry Village, I noticed what appeared to be two small glowing orbs about 30 yards away from me, moving slowly across an open field just off Southside Drive between Camp 4 and Sentinel Bridge. It was quite dark out, but there was still some light from the full moon reflecting off Half Dome, which made it possible for me to see these objects. As I continued watching them, they seemed to stop momentarily, then disappeared into thin air, only to reappear again moments later, further downfield than where they had been before. Their movements were very fluid, like water flowing over rocks, yet they moved in such a way that no human being could ever move their body. It was also clear that these objects were not emitting any light because when they disappeared into thin air, all ambient light around them remained unchanged. Several things about this encounter stand out. Firstly, there is no doubt in my mind that whatever those two objects were, they possessed some kind of intelligence because when I stopped walking, so did they. Secondly, their ability to seemingly vanish into thin air and reappear elsewhere is beyond anything known within our current understanding of physics. Thirdly, if someone wanted access to Southside Drive without being seen doing so, this area between Camp 4 and Sentinel Bridge would be ideal because it's fairly secluded, yet close enough for someone coming from Curry Village or Camp 4 to get there in a relatively short amount of time without being detected by park rangers or other people. Lastly, the way these objects moved across the field reminded me of something swimming underwater, which leads me to believe that whatever they were not from this planet. I would go so far as to say that they may have been some kind of interdimensional being who had temporarily materialized within our reality before disappearing again into their own. I never reported this encounter because I was afraid that if I did, my superiors at Yosemite National Park might think I was either crazy or on drugs and fire me. Also, back then, nobody talked about UFOs or aliens like they do now because it wasn't considered politically correct within the scientific community. The second strange experience happened one night when I was working late at the park's nature center, which is located near Glacier Point Road between Badger Pass Ski Area and Bridal Veil Creek Campground. As a naturalist, it was part of my job to answer questions from visitors about wildlife, plants, and geology. Most nights, things were pretty quiet, but every once in a while, we'd get someone who wanted more information than what could be found in any book. One evening, around 8 o'clock p.m., an elderly man walked through the front door wearing hiking boots with a backpack slung over his shoulder. He looked tired yet determined as he approached me, asking if there were any caves nearby where he could spend the night. I told him there weren't any, but offered him directions to one of several campgrounds within walking distance instead. He thanked me for my help, then left without saying another word. 2 hours later, after finishing up some paperwork inside the nature center before heading home for bed, I noticed movement outside through one of its large windows. It took only seconds for me to realize that the same old man from earlier had returned, only this time he was standing next to a black bear, which had its front paws propped up against the window looking inside. I immediately ran outside, yelling at him to get away from the bear before it attacked, but he just stood there, grinning like an idiot while staring back at me without saying anything. It wasn't until I noticed his eyes glowing red that I became really scared. Not only because of what I was seeing, but also because of how strange and unnatural everything felt in that moment. The scene seemed surreal, as if reality had somehow shifted into another dimension where things no longer made sense or followed any logical order. My first instinct was to run for help, but then I realized doing so would mean leaving the nature center unattended with a wild animal right outside. Instead, I decided my best course of action would be to stay put and hope someone else came along soon who could assist me. As minutes turned into hours, however, nobody ever showed up despite being within earshot of several other buildings, including employee housing. Finally, around 2 a.m., when all hope seemed lost, 2 park rangers appeared out of nowhere. I later learned those same rangers were patrolling nearby when they heard my screams earlier, prompting them to investigate further, resulting in their timely arrival. Most people probably think what happened that night was nothing more than hallucinations brought about by stress fatigue combined with a lack of sleep. However, having experienced similar episodes throughout my life under different circumstances leads me to believe otherwise. Something is going on here beyond mere coincidence or chance occurrence, although exactly what remains a mystery today. Regardless, one thing is certain. Yosemite National Park holds many secrets, not least the existence of extraterrestrial beings living among us. I am uncertain if you can assist me with this. I have perused some of the stories on your website and believed it might be worth an attempt. For numerous years, I have been having an experience that is truly difficult to describe and quite unsettling. I reside in the northern part of Virginia, close to the border of Maryland, which is merely a few miles distant. My home is adjacent to an old Civil War battlefield where a significant number of soldiers lost their lives during the Battle of Ball's Bluff in 1861. My house, constructed around 2000, has consistently been plagued with peculiar events such as unexplained sounds, doors that open and close autonomously, and ghostly figures shifting around. At this juncture, we've pretty much accustomed ourselves to these regular oddities. The first instance that brought to my attention something unusual outside my house occurred when we installed a security camera that overlooked our backyard. This occurred approximately 3 years ago while examining footage after dark one evening. There seemed to be a tall, skeletal figure strolling through our yard from left to right across the display, from out of frame towards our shed adjacent. There are streetlights that illuminate most of our yard space, so it was bright enough to distinguish what appeared like an undead, decaying skeleton creature trudging along rather leisurely with arms oscillating back and forth as it walked. When we watched the video once more later, there didn't appear to be any doubt that it was genuine or counterfeit, as you could clearly discern its shape as well as some detail. The motion appeared fluid and natural, but certainly not natural considering what we were observing. I searched the internet afterwards for data on similar sightings, but came across nothing particular other than ghostly appearances linked with nearby fights. Following that, things got back to normal until the previous year, when odd lights started to show up all over our neighborhood during the early morning hours. It began to occur every few weeks, then escalated, and now they show up almost every night. Sometimes these orbs appear as if they are hovering above the ground, whereas at other times they seem to be at the level of a person strolling by. Their color is typically white, however, now and then they turn up red or greenish in color, although I think this might be because of atmospheric conditions. These orbs can move fairly swiftly and are frequently spotted darting through our gardens, up and down driveways, and alongside streets before they vanish behind trees or residences. I have attempted to capture these lights on my CCTV camera, but the footage appears highly pixelated, and you genuinely can't discern much detail. It's frustrating because I am aware that what we're observing is real, yet nobody else appears interested enough to examine more closely. This has turned into an obsession for me as well as for my family, who now all look forward to observing these lights each evening. We've even captured some video with our phones that appears better than any footage we got on the security camera. However, it's still not clear enough to prove anything. Since the time I first contacted you, we have had more strange experiences. Roughly 2 weeks ago, while reviewing video from our security camera, my wife noticed a large, dark figure moving through the yard from left to right across the screen. It was just after dusk and difficult to make out details, but it appeared to be an animal with antlers or horns on its head. The creature seemed very large and lumbered as it walked past. My wife commented that she had seen this entity multiple times in rapid succession over various nights before it vanished. Alert for details about cryptids in Virginia, I searched the internet and came across certain narratives regarding sightings of goatmen in remote areas spanning the state. However, I found no detailed information related specifically to Northern Virginia. Then, only last week, while we were resting on our front porch one evening at twilight, my son detected a diminutive, shadowy figure darting back and forth between two houses opposite ours. We observed this figure as it moved in an unpredictable manner and then abruptly sprung onto a branch in a tree which was approximately 8 feet above the ground. We were all startled when we realized that what we were seeing looked like a miniature version of what I described earlier. This little guy also had antlers sticking out from his shoulders. He sat there for a moment before jumping down and running into another neighbor's backyard. He then quickly reappeared running along their fence line before disappearing behind their shed. My son got up and ran over to where he thought he would emerge, but never saw him again. We are convinced that these creatures are real since all three of us have seen them at various times now. Any thoughts? I'm a contractor for an undisclosed branch of government, and I've been hired to work on this project since it began. Now that we are getting close to being finished, I feel a lot safer in sharing some of what has happened here with you all. My name is redacted by my request because they do monitor most everything. I was brought onto this job after working as an electrical engineer at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, or LANL, in New Mexico for over 10 years. I specialized in high-energy particle physics. They were looking for someone who could handle the power requirements necessary to keep whatever they had alive down there operational. The location specifically is underneath downtown LA, beneath one of their many buildings near Skid Row. The building above us looks like any other office complex, but it's much larger than normal and goes several floors below ground level. There are only two ways in: through an underground tunnel system or via chopper from Edwards Air Force Base, which flies directly over us every morning around 3. They have about 50 people topside guarding the entrance, so don't try anything funny, please. It won't be a good idea. We began construction back in '89 when President Reagan signed off on Operation Blue Book 2, which would authorize funding specifically allocated towards finding extraterrestrial life forms living among humans without detection. Now, this came shortly after the Roswell crash site discovery revealed advanced technology not made by man alone, therefore proving aliens exist somewhere else outside Earth. After months spent searching various locations across the country, including the Nevada desert region where Area 51 sits today, along with others such as Wright-Patterson AFB, Ohio, etc., we eventually descended upon LA's underground subway system due to its vast size, ease of access, and secrecy involved compared to other potential sites mentioned earlier. Initially, we used existing tunnels connecting different parts of the city together, then expanded them further until large enough to accommodate both personnel and equipment needed to complete the mission objectives assigned. Nowadays, most workers live on site permanently, though some still commute daily depending on their function assigned at the time of the hiring process, which usually involves background checks, etc., similar to any other government agency when employing someone new. Now, there are multiple levels below ground, each one having its own purpose, ranging from research, living quarters, medical facilities, recreational areas, training grounds, etc. Each one is connected via elevators and stairwells, allowing easy movement between them, all without the need to ever go outside unless absolutely necessary, such as during emergencies or if something goes wrong requiring immediate attention. The entire complex is powered by a very advanced fusion reactor, capable of generating enough electricity to keep everything running smoothly around the clock, non-stop, since no sunlight reaches this far due to the depth involved, combined with constant cloud cover experienced above the surface, which makes solar power an impractical option here. Instead, we rely heavily upon nuclear energy produced by our reactors to ensure a continuous supply is available, uninterrupted whenever needed. This project has been kept secret for so long because those in charge don't want the general public knowing about the existence of extraterrestrial life forms among us, fearing widespread panic and chaos could ensue should the word ever get out, leading to mass hysteria, riots, looting, destruction of property, possibly resulting in martial law, and worst of all, distrust in the federal government. During my tenure working there, I've seen things and heard stories told by others that defy explanation and conventional wisdom, but I cannot deny what I've witnessed firsthand, nor dismiss any rumors circulating regarding various testing or experiments conducted on live subjects, some of which are still alive, while others are not so lucky. The fate met by these unfortunate souls remains unknown to anyone, except maybe a few top who oversee operations, closely monitor progress made towards achieving the ultimate goal of capturing aliens undetected within the human population on a large scale, without causing too much disruption to the normal everyday activities carried out by people unaware of anything unusual happening in the nearby vicinity. Everyday lives continue unabated, unaffected by the presence in the shadows beneath the streets. Several different species are known to exist, though the exact number isn't clear, at least to me personally, since information is compartmentalized, and only certain individuals possess the knowledge required to make informed decisions regarding the future course of action to be taken concerning the ongoing investigation. But I believe there are at least 5, possibly more, currently residing among us today, based on what I've seen, heard, and read over the years while employed here. These beings come in various shapes, sizes, and colors. Some look almost identical to humans, while others resemble hybrids, like animals, insects, plants, and even objects found in nature like rocks, trees, water, clouds, and air, depending on their origin and genetic makeup involved, which varies greatly between the species discovered and far through other experiments. Each individual group encountered during past encounters with them by personnel assigned specific tasks relating to gathering intelligence, capturing specimens, studying behavioral patterns, and analyzing biological samples obtained from autopsies performed on deceased subjects brought to the facility for testing purposes. I've probably already spoken too much, but I will leave you with this. Know that the truth is out there and that there is far more going on than you will ever know as a civilian stuck in the public eye. In the summer of 2013, my friend and I went camping in Yosemite National Park. We had a lot of fun that day, hiking and seeing all the sights. When it got dark, we set up our tent and made dinner. It was about 10 p.m. when we finished eating, so we went to bed because there wasn't much else to do. We were lying down for about an hour when my friend said he needed to pee badly, so he unzipped the tent and walked outside. I heard him say, "What is that?" So I sat up and looked out of the tent. This tall, shadowy figure was standing right next to our campfire, which was still going pretty strong at this point. The figure appeared to be composed of mist or a similar substance. It didn't have any eyes or a mouth, but it had arms hanging by its sides. I asked my friend what he thought it was. He said, "I don't know, but let's get back inside." We both crawled into our sleeping bags without saying another word. We stayed awake for most of the night, too scared to sleep. At one point during the night, I could hear footsteps walking around our campsite. Then, they stopped right outside our tent. They started again after a few minutes, then eventually faded away. My friend says he saw something move past his head on top of the tent, but I never saw anything like that. Whatever came into our camp left before morning because nothing happened after those footsteps stopped. When we woke up in the morning, everything seemed normal. Nothing had been disturbed during the night. After breakfast, we packed all our stuff and then hiked back down the mountain. Once home, we told some friends about what happened. One person suggested that maybe Bigfoot came into our camp, but from everything I've read, Bigfoot doesn't seem very likely. Another person mentioned skinwalkers being known for appearing as mists or shadows. So far, though, no one has been able to give us a definitive answer as to what we saw that night. I live in the Northern Virginia area, about 40 miles west of Washington, D.C. My property is located in a very rural area, surrounded by forest and farmland. I have experienced several encounters with what appears to be Dogman on my property since October 2015. I own a small farm where I raise sheep and goats for their wool as well as for sale at local farmers markets. I also keep chickens and turkeys for eggs. Over the past few months, something has been killing my livestock. My first encounter was one evening when I was tending to the animals before sunset. As it began to get dark outside, I heard an eerie howl coming from behind me near some dense trees that border my pasture fence line. I quickly turned around and saw what appeared to be a large wolf-like creature standing on its hind legs approximately 50 feet away from me. It looked like it had just killed one of my lambs. It then dropped down onto all fours again before running off into the woods behind my house. Its body was huge, much larger than any normal dog or wolf should ever be, almost bear-like but not quite as big as a full-grown black bear would be. Its front paws were enormous with long claws that seemed razor-sharp. The fur covering its body was jet black, shiny yet dirty-looking, kind of like how wet tar is when you see it spread out over pavement after rainstorms. My second encounter happened about 2 weeks later during daylight hours while working in my barn cleaning stalls. At this point, there were 3 separate pens inside the barn. One held 2 pregnant ewes who were due within days. Another contained 6 young rams which had recently been weaned from their mothers. They were only about 5 months old, while the third pen housed 4 older rams that were being fattened up for market. During late morning, while sweeping up hay near one of these pens where the older rams are kept, I noticed a large black shadow moving outside the barn window. When I looked up to see what it was, there stood this huge dogman creature looking in at me through the glass with its head slightly tilted to one side. I could clearly see its face, which had wolf-like features such as pointed ears and a long snout filled with sharp teeth. Its eyes were yellowish in color and glowed like embers of burning coal. The body was covered with thick fur that appeared dirty but well-groomed. The creature stood on 2 legs, similar to how we humans stand, while holding onto an adjacent fence post for support with one of its hands, or paws. It seemed interested in watching me clean stalls rather than being focused on my livestock or attacking them. My third encounter happened just last week during daylight hours again when I was out checking fences near our front gate. As I walked along the fence line next to the woods, something suddenly charged at me from behind some trees about 30 feet away before stopping abruptly once reaching the edge of the forest line. It then began pacing back and forth along the fence, growling deeply under its breath as if warning me not to come any closer into its territory. Though still frightened by previous encounters, curiosity got the best of me. So, instead of retreating back towards the house like I did the other times, I decided to stay put where I was since it was daytime now, thinking more people would be around the area, making me feel safer. I slowly approached the beast while talking softly, attempting to communicate my intentions non-verbally, letting it know I meant no harm. I was hoping it might understand my signals and get the message to leave us alone and go away. Sadly, this wasn't the case, as it continued to advance closer despite the efforts I made to try and defuse the situation. After a few minutes of standoff, it started lunging forward, barking loudly, causing me to run backwards screaming, trying to escape its clutches. Never in my life have I felt such terror until that moment when I managed to reach the safety beyond the gates. Police have been contacted multiple times regarding these incidents, but they won't help because it's just wildlife. Animal control is useless as well since they don't believe these creatures exist. I'm desperate for help and don't know what to do. I've also noticed that the dogs in my neighborhood have been acting strangely lately. They seem more aggressive than usual and often bark at nothing or refuse to go outside at night, even when called by their owners. I'm afraid that if something isn't done soon, this dogman will continue killing my livestock and possibly attack me or someone else on my property. Well, about 3 years ago, I started noticing strange behavior in my animals. The sheep and goats were becoming very skittish and would not come out of their barns at night. This was unusual because they usually roam around the pasture freely during the day and go into their barns at night for protection. I also noticed that some of my chickens and turkeys were going missing. At first, I thought it was just a predator like a coyote or fox, but the way the animals were acting made me think otherwise. Then, about 2 years ago, I started finding mutilated animal carcasses on my property. The bodies were torn apart and there was evidence of large bite marks on them. This confirmed my suspicion that something more than a normal predator was responsible. I tried to report these incidents to the local police and animal control, but they didn't take me seriously. They said it was probably just wildlife, and there wasn't much they could do about it. Since then, things have only gotten worse. My livestock is being killed regularly, and now I am having encounters with what appears to be Dogman. I don't know what else to do at this point. I am desperate for help because no one seems to believe me or wants to get involved. Please let me know if you have any advice or suggestions. Thank you. I have been meaning to write to you about an incident that happened back in 1976. It was the summer after my first year of college, and I was working as a delivery driver for a pizza place in Richmond, Virginia. One night, I had just delivered an order to this house near Mechanicsville, which is north of the city. The man who answered the door gave me a decent tip, so it put me in a good mood. As I was driving back, I saw this hitchhiker standing on the side of the road with his thumb sticking out. I pulled over, and he got into my car without saying anything other than thanks. The guy looked like he hadn't showered or changed clothes for weeks, but he didn't smell bad at all. Actually, kind of sweet smelling, if that makes any sense. We continued along until we reached Laburnum Avenue. That's when things started getting strange. It appeared that every vehicle around us began slowing down while moving from lane to lane in a random manner. People were blowing their horns constantly, while others were shouting offensive language at each other. As we continued along Laburnum Avenue, there were several intersections where cars would be halted at red lights, and they would start revving their engines before charging off once the light turned green. One particular intersection captured our attention because it appeared like there were two groups battling with each other on different sides of Laburnum Avenue, flinging punches and wrestling around. Another block farther down, there were 3 police cars halting the traffic while officers attempted to placate people by gesturing with their arms. After passing another intersection, everything suddenly returned to normal. The vehicles sped up again, as did mine. Once in downtown Richmond, near Capitol Square Park and St. Paul's Churchyard Cemetery, everything seemed quiet again. The hitchhiker told me to stop near the park, and he thanked me before getting out of my car. He didn't say anything else. I was confused by what had just happened. so I pulled over in a parking lot near City Hall and tried to make sense of it all. The entire episode seemed surreal, almost like a dream or something. After approximately 10 minutes, I initiated my vehicle and proceeded towards home with absolutely no additional problems. Since that particular night, I have never encountered anything like that ever again. I harbored a desire to disclose this story to someone for years, yet I remained uncertain about who would put faith in my words. I neglected to mention that upon the hitchhiker's initial entrance into my vehicle, his physical appearance was somewhat skeletal, appearing as if his flesh was absent in certain regions. It's hard to explain, almost like he had just come out of a crematorium or something, but once we started driving and I took notice of him again, it seemed that his appearance had changed to slightly more flesh on his body and a bit healthier looking. The entire episode lasted around 10 minutes or so from start to finish. Let me know if you need any other information. I live in the area of the state of Virginia. My husband and I were driving to a family gathering at my parents' house when we observed something that thoroughly frightened us both. It was approximately 5:30 in the evening on a day obscured by clouds, preceded by some rainfall. We were traveling on Route 7 between Purcellville and Round Hill in Virginia. It is mostly open country out here, with plenty of farms. We turned around a bend in the road where there is a long straight path for several hundred yards ahead of you before it twists again towards the left. As we began down this part of the road, I spotted what looked like two figures standing close to the edge of the road. I could see that one figure was bigger than the other, but they seemed nearly human-like from what I could discern at first glance. Then, as we got closer, maybe within 50 feet or so, I realized that these things looked more like animals than people. The smaller figure turned away from us, but as we passed by them, my husband said, "What is that?" I turned around quickly and saw this undead, rotting skeletal creature looking right back at me. The thing was holding up its hand as if waving goodbye or something. My heart skipped a beat, then suddenly lunged towards our car with such speed. My husband swerved into oncoming traffic, trying to avoid hitting it while speeding up. We made eye contact again just before he swerved onto his side and disappeared behind some trees. As soon as he did, another identical creature jumped out in front of our car, causing my husband to slam on his brakes hard enough to send me flying forward into the dashboard. I heard him scream too, which terrified me even more because he never screams. When everything settled down, we continued driving without uttering a word until we reached my parents' house. However, once inside their home, all hell broke loose once I shared what had happened. At first, they did not believe us, but then noticed the deep scratch marks on the side of our car that we hadn't seen before. Then my father decided to call his friend, who is a local sheriff, and tell him what happened. He said that there have been similar reports over the years around this area, mostly from people driving alone late at night. So now I am scared to death about going anywhere after dark, particularly since it gets dark early during the winter months. We don't know if these creatures are real or some kind of hallucination caused by something else like drugs maybe. Either way, I never want to see them again. I've been following your YouTube for several years, and I believe that you are one of the few who can handle a story such as this. In fact, you might be able to possibly help with what is happening in California's Sierra Nevada mountains. Long story short, I would consider myself a fairly experienced outdoorsman. I've been all over North America hiking, including Alaska and Canada's Yukon Territory. In fact, just a few months ago, I was contacted by email from someone claiming to be a part of an underground branch of government who is investigating Bigfoot activity in Northern California's Trinity Alps Wilderness area, right around near Redding. The person provided very specific details about 2 incidents where campers were killed by Bigfoot creatures. This person stated that he had personally seen these beings on numerous occasions while working as a contractor for the U.S. Forest Service in Shasta Trinity National Forests. He described them as very large humanoids, generally having long black hair or cinnamon red hair, except for their faces, which had less hair but enough to hide any facial features. He also noted seeing other individuals at different times which appeared smaller than the others, possibly females or younger ones. Now, according to this information, there has been an ongoing cover-up regarding these deaths since they occurred within federal park lands. It appears that my background experience made me appealing enough for him to reach out for assistance. He's even sent me photos taken with night vision equipment showing 3 adult males moving through heavy forest right near Whiskeytown Lake area, just west of Redding. The photo clearly shows 2 dark figures walking upright alongside each other, carrying something between them using both hands, just like a person. A third figure is partially visible behind trees further back in, because it seems unlikely anyone would try such deception unless real proof existed. And knowing how hard it would be to fake something like this, I'm inclined to think these may actually show some kind of creatures present. But before contacting authorities or trying to get more evidence myself, if possible, I wanted to see if I can get your take on it. If true, then obviously we should proceed cautiously because killing people without reason isn't something any animal would do. So if they are doing it for some reason, then we should try to understand what that is before rushing to judgment and, potentially causing more harm than good. Also, I don't know how much you've looked into the Bigfoot subject, but there seems to be a lot of these beings killing hikers. The person informed me that they have spent several years studying this phenomenon as well as other cryptids in the area. And he began stating that his experience in the Shasta Trinity National Forest made him realize that most encounters with Sasquatch were simply not peaceful or benign. He said to me, and I quote, "These are not gentle giants, they are ruthless predators." That will always stick with me, but I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on all of this. Or, if you decide to read this for any of your channels, I would be curious to hear what anyone else has to say on it. My husband and I were driving through Yosemite National Park in California. As we stopped at a pullout to take pictures of the scenery, we noticed another car parked further down the road. People were standing around, looking up into the trees above them. Being curious, we decided to see what they were looking at. As we approached them, one man told us he saw something moving in the trees. The others agreed with him and said they thought it was a bear. I am an avid animal lover and have always been interested in wildlife, so this caught my attention. I asked if anyone had binoculars or anything like that, but no one did. So I returned to our vehicle and got out my camera, which had a 300mm zoom lens, hoping that whatever it was would still be there by the time I returned. Well, sure enough, as soon as I focused on where everyone was pointing, I could see movement way up high in the branches of one of those tall pine trees. I started taking pictures, even though all you could see from where we stood was foliage. Then, after about 10 minutes, this large black thing came flying out of those branches, heading straight for me. It landed beside me, knocking me off balance because it hit so hard. The other people scattered, running back towards their cars, screaming "bear" repeatedly. My husband grabbed hold of me, pulling me away from whatever this was before jumping into our vehicle himself. Then, as quickly as everything happened, it flew off again, only going higher into some more nearby pines. Undoubtedly, what attacked me wasn't any kind of bear, because bears don't fly. They climb up things slowly, not crashing down onto someone out of nowhere like what happened here. That being said, though, I'm not saying this thing had wings either. Instead, it had these large flaps of skin or something similar stretching out from its sides, which it used to glide through the air. I can't even begin to describe how huge this thing was because it's beyond anything I've ever seen. It had a long tail, like that of a kangaroo, only thicker and longer. It also had very muscular legs as well. The arms on this creature were much shorter than you'd expect for an animal of its size, but they ended in massive claws resembling talons. And then there was the head. Oh my god. The head particularly captivated my attention due to its atypical appearance, unlike any bear or large cat I have ever encountered. The best way I can describe it would be if you took a wolf and crossed it with some sort of dinosaur. That's exactly what this thing's face looked like. It had large yellow eyes with slits in them, just like a reptile would, along with rows upon rows of sharply pointed teeth inside its mouth. As soon as we got home, I started doing research online, trying to find out if anyone else has ever reported seeing something similar to what we encountered here. But so far, all I've found are stories about people being attacked by bears in Yosemite National Park. I know, though, without any doubt whatsoever, that wasn't any damn bear who came flying down onto me earlier today. This thing was real, and unless someone finds proof otherwise, I'm sticking to my story too. No one will ever convince me otherwise. This event happened to me about 15 years ago. I lived in Montana and was attending college at the time. During spring break, a few of my friends and I decided to go backpacking in Yellowstone National Park for several days. In the late afternoon of the first day, we reached our destination and began hiking into Slough Creek Trail, situated north of Tower Junction. I will mention that I've always been fascinated with the possibility of encountering Bigfoot or some other unknown creature while out camping, but this experience was something entirely different. Our plan was to hike deep into the backcountry, where we would set up camp near a lake and then do some fishing before nightfall. There were 4 of us, Dave, Keith, and Sean, who were brothers. It took us over 2 hours to reach our campsite after starting from the trailhead. The area is very rugged but beautiful, with high peaks surrounded by thick pine forests. As soon as we reached our spot, it started raining heavily, so we quickly pitched our tents under cover among a stand of tall trees. We made dinner inside one tent because it continued raining through most of the evening. The rain finally stopped around midnight, so Dave suggested that he take a first look outside for bears or any other wildlife activity. It wasn't long until all 3 of us fell asleep. The next thing I remember is waking up early in the morning when daylight had just broken out across the sky. Suddenly, Dave came bursting through his tent, screaming like mad. He said something attacked him during his watch and told us what happened. According to Dave's account, he heard something walking towards him from behind just as he noticed movement off to his left side. He said he only turned on his flashlight a few moments before seeing this large, bat-like creature flying right at him. Dave stated that it looked exactly like an oversized vampire bat with dark brownish-black fur covering its body. It grabbed onto his arm while knocking him down backwards, where he fell to the ground. Dave said that he managed to kick it off and then got up to run towards our tents. He claimed that the creature pursued him, attempting to grab his leg as he made it through the tree line and into camp. That's when all of us woke up after hearing Dave screaming outside. I asked him if this was some kind of joke, but Keith and Sean seemed just as terrified as Dave did at that moment. Dave showed me a small puncture wound on his arm, which appeared fresh, but there wasn't much blood around it. Investigating where we were standing, I noticed large footprints in the mud near one tent. They measured about 15 inches long by 8 inches wide, with claw marks at the front. It looked like something out of Jurassic Park. We decided not to stay any longer because no one wanted another encounter with whatever attacked us. The entire hike back was quiet until we reached our vehicle. None of us could comprehend what had occurred or what kind of creature had attacked Dave. As for now, I haven't been back in Yellowstone since then, nor have I told anyone else about my experience. Could this have been an actual unknown species? If so, has anyone ever encountered such a thing before? If I could accurately describe this thing that attacked us, I would say it was a large bat-like creature, but not an actual bat. The best way to describe it is as follows. Its body size was similar to that of a very large owl, with a wingspan reaching at least 6 feet across. It had dark brownish-black fur covering its entire body except for the wings, which were more leathery-looking. The head was monstrous and appeared demonic in nature. 2 red eyes positioned forward, along with 2 small ears sticking up on top, and a pointy snout filled with razor-sharp teeth that could easily tear flesh apart. The arms looked like those of an oversized vampire bat, but much thicker, ending in long claws resembling fingers. Its legs were thick and muscular, like those of a bear or gorilla, again ending in long clawed feet. I didn't notice any tails, nor do I recall smelling anything strange about this creature during our encounter. Researchers have not reported any animal or bird species within Yellowstone National Park that remotely resemble this entity. Maybe something similar exists deep within the South American rainforests, but who can say for sure? If you can shed some light on what we encountered, please let me know. Thank you. I have an experience I wanted to share with what I believe was a shapeshifter sighting. This incident occurred about 5 years ago in Birch Run, located in Michigan's Thumb region, not far from where others have reported seeing the Dogman. I was familiar with the area, having spent many summers there, though I haven't visited for several years prior to this event. My wife and I decided to spend a weekend there, choosing to ride our motorcycle due to the pleasant weather forecast. We spent most of the day riding around, revisiting old spots and taking pictures with my digital camera. On our way back towards Bay City, we encountered an interesting-looking dirt road leading into the woods. It seemed like an old logging path, so we followed it, hoping to discover something interesting. Well, about a quarter-mile down, the terrain worsened. I noticed what looked like a deer lying in the brush beside us. I stopped immediately, fearing the animal might get startled by our bike and jump in front of us. The animal was about 20 feet away, and at first glance, it seemed to be sleeping as its eyes were closed. However, upon closer inspection, I realized its eyes were squinting shut. When it opened them, I saw they were not typical deer eyes. They appeared almost human-like, with full white sclera and dark, perfectly centered pupils. Another odd detail was that the deer's ears did not move at all. This was strange, as wild animals are usually very sensitive to their surroundings. Growing very suspicious, I watched the animal more closely. Suddenly, it changed shape before my eyes, transforming into a wolf or dog-like creature. This thing was neither distinctly a wolf nor a dog, but something in between. The transformation took about 3 to 4 seconds. The sighting was unsettling, and I wanted to leave immediately. I revved the engine and we sped off down the road, engulfed by an overwhelming sense of dread that followed. At about 30 miles on this rough trail, our bike hit something hard, causing a severe jolt and nearly making me lose control. My wife asked what we had hit, but I couldn't identify it. It felt like a large rock, obscured by dust as we passed over it. Once we reached the pavement, we felt safer. We didn't discuss the incident until we stopped for gas later on. We both agreed that we might have seen a real shapeshifter. After sharing this experience with several people, many suggested it might have been a hallucination caused by exhaustion and dehydration. However, reading other similar accounts has made me reconsider. Have you heard any similar stories, or is this unique to me? If anyone else has witnessed such events, please contact me. I need to know I'm not alone in this belief. Thank you for reading this. I would appreciate it if you can keep my identity anonymous, should you choose to post this on your YouTube. It was the summer of 1977. I had just graduated from high school and decided to go on a trip with my best friend to Yosemite National Park in California. We were both nature lovers and wanted to experience the beauty of this famous park. My friend, who we'll call Tom, drove his car as we made our way west from Illinois. After several days on the road, we arrived at Yosemite late in the afternoon. We found a campsite near Bridal Veil Falls and set up our tent for the night. The next morning, Tom woke me up early so we could hike some of the trails before it got too hot. We packed some snacks and water bottles into our backpacks and headed out. As we hiked along one trail, I noticed something strange about an area off to our right. It looked like there was a small clearing among all the trees with what appeared to be several stone pillars standing upright. I pointed it out to Tom, who agreed it looked unusual. So, being curious teenagers, we decided to leave the trail and investigate further. As we approached this clearing, which was about 100 yards away from us now, I saw that these stone pillars were large monoliths carved into various shapes, like ancient statues or markers. There were 5 of them arranged in a semicircle formation facing outward toward us. One depicted what seemed like an animal with wings. Another showed a human figure holding something above its head, while others seemed more abstract or difficult for me to describe accurately. At first glance, they reminded me somewhat of those huge heads on Easter Island, but much smaller since each stood only about 6 feet tall. They all appeared weathered by time, but still retained their original shape. Then things started getting weird. A sudden gust of wind blew through this little valley where these stones stood, causing leaves to rustle around us. I suddenly felt cold despite it being quite warm that day. Tom noticed it too, and we both stopped to look around. The wind seemed to have come from nowhere since no trees or other obstacles nearby could have caused such a strong gust. As I turned my head toward the stone pillars again, I saw something even more bizarre. They had changed shape. Instead of being carved monoliths as before, they appeared like living beings with arms and legs. The one resembling an eagle now looked like a giant bird ready to take flight, while another seemed like a warrior holding a weapon. I rubbed my eyes, thinking maybe this was some kind of hallucination, but when I opened them again, everything remained the same. Tom shouted at me, asking if I saw what he did. We were both stunned by this strange transformation happening right before our eyes. Suddenly, these statues started moving their limbs, swaying back and forth as if alive. It was then that we heard voices coming from behind us. We turned around quickly to see who was there but found nobody. It sounded like several people spoke in low tones, but the words weren't clear enough for us to understand. We stood frozen in place, unsure of what exactly was happening here. Then, all at once, those figures collapsed into piles of rubble, leaving nothing standing where they once stood. Feeling extremely frightened, we quickly decided to leave immediately, without further delay. But As we began walking away from this spot, another gust of wind blew through, knocking us off balance. When I regained my footing and looked back towards those stones, something caught my eye. A man wearing Native American attire stepped forward from among them. He wore deerskin leggings with feathers tied into his long black hair. He carried a spear made out of wood, topped by what appeared to be an obsidian blade. This guy must have been about 6 feet tall, based on his comparison against those statues earlier. He approached us slowly with an intense expression, pointing the spear towards us as if ready to attack. Tom and I backed away cautiously, but before we could react further, this man vanished into thin air right before our eyes. We stood there stunned momentarily, trying to comprehend what happened, when suddenly everything returned to normal. The wind stopped blowing, the temperature rose again, and those stones were nothing more than piles of rocks lying on the ground where they fell. We left that area quickly without looking back. Once we returned to the main trail, we never spoke about it again until now. I don't know how to explain what occurred that day, other than some kind of time slip or dimensional shift. It's not something you expect to happen while visiting a national park, but it did. My only regret is not taking any photos, since neither of us owned a camera. But maybe it's better this way. Some things are best left unrecorded because people might think you're crazy if you tell them. So here's my story, Josh. I hope you find it interesting enough to share with your readers. I had what I believe to be a Wendigo sighting in the snowy woods of a national park. My friend, an experienced outdoorsman and survivalist, had accompanied me. We embarked on a 3-day camping trip in the midst of winter to test our skills and gear. Although not as experienced as he is, I have accompanied him on many trips and know how to react in emergencies. We set up our camp near a frozen lake. We were confident it was safe to walk on, as its deepest point was only about 2 feet. The first day passed smoothly. We built a shelter, gathered firewood, and cooked over the fire. The second day also began well, but things turned strange later that night. Around midnight, we heard a bizarre noise outside our shelter. It resembled a scream of bloody murder and lasted for about 10 seconds before stopping abruptly. Then, silence enveloped us for half an hour until the sound returned. This time, it was closer and lasted longer, about 20 seconds. We both agreed that the source of these screams was neither human nor animal. No creature could emit such sounds without succumbing to exhaustion. After debating the possible causes of these screams, we decided to investigate, armed with knives. As we stepped outside, the screaming ceased, and an eerie quietness took over. The absence of wind was odd, especially since strong gusts had been blowing all evening. We walked toward the sound's origin, and suddenly, my friend grabbed my arm and pointed behind me. Turning around slowly, I faced a tall figure covered in white fur, standing beside a tree and staring at us. It resembled a cross between a deer and a wolf, but much larger. It must have stood at least 8 feet tall, based on its height relative to the tree. Paralyzed with fear, I was pulled back into the shelter by my friend. We stayed up all night, knives at the ready, in case this thing attacked. Fortunately, it did not, and we heard no further screams. The next morning, we quickly packed our gear and left the area as fast as possible. I don't know if I would exactly call myself a federal agent, but I've been contracted by the government for multiple assignments, and particularly to monitor the activities of certain paranormal groups. I've been given permission to provide you with information about an incident that occurred back in 2012 near Joshua Tree in California. The witness was camping on BLM land east of Joshua Tree National Park for several days. This area is known as the Rocks due to the large boulders scattered throughout this desert landscape. On one night in particular, right around midnight, he heard what sounded like someone running through his campsite, as if they were being chased by something or someone else. He grabs his flashlight, scans the area, but didn't see anything out of place. He decided not to pursue any further investigation, as it could be dangerous if there was some kind of confrontation. As he lay back down in his tent, he noticed a bright light shining into it from outside, and then everything went black. Now, when he woke up later, he wasn't sure how long, it was daylight and hot inside the tent. When he unzipped the flap and looked outside, all that remained at his campsite were tire tracks leading away. There had also been numerous other campsites set up nearby when he arrived earlier, but now there were no signs that anyone had ever occupied them. After packing up quickly, while scanning for any unusual activity or persons approaching, he just left. It's my belief that these beings are very aware of who we are and why we're here. I think their objective is purely experimental, to gather data on our biology without causing harm. They've done so many things which indicate curiosity, such as hovering over people, lying prone before zapping them. But in this case, I'm guessing whoever visited your friend probably just got carried away whilst performing tests. They didn't want him telling others what happened here, hence erasing the memory. I was on vacation in Yellowstone National Park with my family and friends. We stayed at the Lake Lodge, a hotel situated right next to Lake Yellowstone. On our first day, we decided to explore the lakeside, attracted by its beauty. During our hour-long walk along the shore, I captured something unusual in one of my photos. It showed what seemed to be a ghostly figure emerging from behind a tree, surrounded by mist or fog. Adding to the mystery, the temperature dropped significantly as we walked back towards our car. It was a strange experience. The sun was still shining, yet it felt as if a freezer door had been opened, releasing a rush of cold air. We continued our walk, encountering no one except a few bicyclists. By the time we reached the parking lot, we were all freezing and quickly turned the car's heater to full blast. Then things took an even more bizarre turn. My friend in the passenger seat suddenly asked, "Did you see him?" Confused, I asked if she was referring to the man in the red flannel shirt. She shook her head and told me that she meant the man who was dressed in black, standing by the tree. My heart sank at her words. It was startling to realize I wasn't the only one who had seen these apparitions. Others had witnessed them too. At least 2 other people confirmed they saw the same figures once I shared my sighting. There was something unquestionably strange happening in the park. Could it be a haunted place with ghosts and spirits roaming around? It sounds crazy, but I can't think of any other explanation. My sister and I were walking through the woods on a path in Northern Virginia, near Bull Run. It was 1968. We had heard that there was a Civil War hospital nearby where wounded soldiers were treated. The trail went along an old stone wall, then down into a ravine, and back up again. We observed what seemed to be an object resting on top of the wall a little distance away from us, so we advanced nearer to identify what it could potentially be. As we moved closer, we recognized a deceased, decomposing-like creature lying there with its head angled towards us, almost as if it were observing us. Its frame appeared as though it had been rotting for several years, yet nevertheless, It looked alive, as its skeleton was shifting with a slow rhythm similar to breathing. We shouted, retreated quickly from the forest, and disclosed the incident to our mother, who refused to accept our account. My father took his shotgun and went into the woods to check things out, but he came back later saying he hadn't seen anything. I am now wondering if this could have possibly been some kind of zombie or demon. I believe that this thing, whatever it may have been, was a supernatural entity. I deduce this from an indigenous legend that my sister and I had heard about the area where we encountered it. The local Native American tribes in the Northern Virginia area believed that there was a powerful demon living deep within the woods who would come out to hunt for victims. The legend said that he would capture his prey, then carry them off into the forest, where he would eat their flesh and drink their blood while they were still alive. My sister and I have always thought that what we saw must have been this demon creature from the Indian legends. I don't know if anyone else has ever seen anything like what we saw, but it was definitely not of this world. Throughout my life, I've felt like I've had a host of bizarre experiences that I can't quite explain. But one in particular stands out. It occurred in 2007 while I was vacationing with my family at Acadia National Park in Maine. We spent about 4 days camping at the Blackwoods campground. Our second night, as we sat around the campfire, we heard sounds in the woods behind us. It resembled someone walking slowly through the trees, pausing occasionally before resuming. These noises unnerved me, so I decided to investigate. Venturing about 20 feet into the woods, I reached a clearing covered in pine needles. After a brief pause, where the only sound I heard was distant traffic from Route 3, I returned to the campsite. That's when something in my peripheral caught my attention. About 30 feet away, behind some trees, stood what appeared to be a large, upright canine-like creature. It was roughly 5 to 6 feet tall, covered in dark brown fur, with less hair on the head. Its face resembled that of a wolf or coyote, complete with pointed ears. It seemed to be staring directly at me, aware of my presence despite the darkness. As I stood frozen, unsure of what to do, another creature emerged from behind the trees further downhill. This second being also fixed its gaze on me, standing motionless. Feeling threatened, I decided to leave quickly but cautiously, keeping my eyes on them until they were out of sight. Then I ran back to our campsite. I chose not to share this experience with my family, fearing they might dismiss it as a figment of my imagination. However, the following day, while hiking, my sister mentioned seeing something peculiar. She described it as a large, dark brown dog or wolf with upright pointed ears, moving on 2 legs before dropping to all 4s as it crossed our path. I'm convinced these creatures exist in some parts of North America. I was in the Grand Canyon with my husband and 2 children. We were on a family vacation and decided to go hiking in the park. We had been hiking for about 3 hours when we came across a small clearing with a stream running through it. We decided to stop and rest for a bit. My husband went to get some water for the stream while I sat down on a rock with the kids. I was looking around at the trees and rocks when I noticed something strange. There was a large rock formation on the other side of the stream that looked like a face. It had 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth. It was very detailed and looked like it had been carved by someone. I pointed it out to my husband, and he came over to look at it. He agreed that it looked exactly like a face and said that it was probably just a natural formation. We sat there for a few more moments, then decided to continue our hike. As we're leaving, I turned around to get one last look at the face, and that's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. The eyes of the face were glowing red. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I called my husband over and he saw it too. We quickly grabbed the kids and ran back down the trail. We didn't stop until we reached the bottom of the canyon. I have no idea what that was, but the entire time after we saw it, I just got this really bad feeling. Like, I don't know if there was somebody watching us, but it just felt like we shouldn't be there. Like there was just bad energy around us. It's really hard for me to describe. And then the eyes glowing red was just the icing on the cake. I feel like there is something strange going on in that national park, and I don't think a lot of people are wanting to talk about it.